see where she goes. Welcome everybody to what we are titling the Portal Mountain Development Meeting number 39. We've been discussing in this meeting stretch the development of a book titled so far Portal Mountain: The Quest for Coherence, and then in a subtext I was thinking organizing self and society, something like that. You know what I'm saying?
So typical self-help crap.
Something's got to be there that, because the title, it's kind of, anyways, it's a little bit nondescript. The quest for coherence. What does it all mean? So anyhow, we're going to try to lightly bring you, the listener, up to speed on what we've been up to here, and also continue on with our discussion regarding orbiting around the self, and
maybe even start there.
Yes, so we do intend to in this meeting to kind of revisit what we mean by the self and where it comes from, as because this is really at the root of what we need to learn and understand in order to move in a healthy way up to the social. So we want to move the book from, we're in a section or chapter about the self, and we want to move to social. We know there are constraints.
Or society, rather.
Constraints at the self, you take care of at the self level. It's kind of like fix yourself before you fix anybody else. But then, okay, now I fix myself, now what? Anyways, so we want to revisit.
And also, why is there a fix yourself element to it in the first place?
Revisit the fundamentals of self, basically. That's what we want to make this thing all about. And if we're lucky, we'll kind of get into social society stuff. That's what we're trying to push towards. So we're going to keep continually bringing up society where possible, and see how, if we don't get this right in the self, society gets wrecked. The earth becomes a turd, right? What was we were talking about?
The earth becomes a shit pile.
A shit pile. You become a turd. The earth is a shit pile. That's the emergent level. Don't miss the turd for the shit pile.
Yeah.
That's what they say.
You don't get one without the other. And if it's only one turd, it's not that big.
He couldn't see the shit pile for the turds.
The thing is that if you only have a few turds, you don't necessarily have shit piles. But if you have shit piles, you definitely have a lot of turds.
Right.
So that's another image to keep in mind.
The breakaway shit pile, as we call it.
Okay, that's some new terminology right there for you. We might get into its origins or the where it
and once
from.
It starts flying, the flying shit pile, that's even worse. Oh my god!
But remember how it's funny, because if you remember the previous couple of images, one of them was like the spinning wheel in the middle of the sky,
which just kind of shit
flying everywhere,
and a lot. That's as entropic out into nothing, and then some of it comes back down. So the thing sustaining it goes back into that. So what
comes back down are the turds, but with the amount that they combine into are benevolent shit piles.
Yeah,
that's the full imagery right there. So
we're haphazardly digesting the earth.
With that said, cover your face.
Yeah, to start. So getting into the self, that's going to be a big topic here for this stream. Revisiting the fundamentals, basically, of which, so if you listen to the last meeting and the one before, we've been kind of hovering and orbiting around things that we know that we need to pile together.
Yeah, right. We want to get into a little bit of the mechanics so that it all kind of clicks together.
Meandering around, we kind of realize we haven't really talked about the tether itself, and we've been developing the idea, talking about self and self-reference, self as an object, ego as a sub-self type, which emergent from the self, the fundamentals of the self existing. Now you can have egos, which is also breakaway exploitation of that.
Ego is the emergent variation of the self, in which it is completely tethered to an abstraction.
Right. So we need to talk a bit more about the whole cycle process of the moment and what's actually happening. That's kind of details which we plan to get into.
I was wondering if it makes more sense to start off with the actual mirroring effect, like the Indra's net sort of description where I alluded to earlier.
The special mirror as well.
Yeah,
the
like,
one
like
that
even in the single cell organism, for example, you have like a mechanism in which if you depress the wall, for example, it releases chemistry, which allows it to turn, and whether or not like that constitutes. Well, this is what we're saying is constituted in the thinking framework behind which we're putting our bets on.
the funhouse.
Yeah.
We referred to that in our talk with that.
Yes.
Also the polyglottic polycoin or whatever.
So the very idea of it being that whenever you see a delineation of something that's in the membrane, an inner environment and an outer environment, you have a case of the inner environment being a reflection of the outer environment.
You need an isomorphism. This is what neural networks do.
Yeah, and the simplest example is that wall-hitting microorganism that uses the chemistry released as a way to navigate obstacles. Extrapolating from that idea and making environments within environments within environments within environments.
Complex adaptive systems.
All of which are reflective of each other to some degree. Sometimes reflecting only of themselves, of the inner environment, and so on. We get a kind of like a backdrop picture of the kind of self-referential system that we've been discussing. So with the build-up of the self-referential system, we have by default what's called a self-reference. And again, it's self-referential because on the outer layers, yes, you have the mechanism to reflect the outer environment directly, but as the organism becomes more complex, more environments within the environment become reflective of only in the internal environment itself, and that complexity builds in more and more and more.
Breakaway. Yeah, so self is a channel that allows that breakaway to happen, I think, and especially we see it through the ego. That breakaway happens.
Well, I'm not really pointing to that yet.
So
what I'm saying is that eventually you get to a neurological network in which the same pattern takes hold. The neurological network reflects the body that it's a part of, but at the same time begins to get more complex by reflecting parts of itself, and then getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And so the whole basis of our exposition becomes this internalized self-reference by definition.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of.
So I hope that's clear enough to follow.
Was it Jeb with the just how a layer is in its own language is trying to communicate the whole of what's below, quote unquote, and everywhere, but there is an inherent missing and uncertainty to what you can actually do.
Well, yes, this is that pattern, because if you look at the original microorganism that I'm talking about, the language of the internal organism is reflective of the external environment, in that whenever it gets depressed by a physical object in a certain way, the internal environment rearranges itself to shift the entire organism to follow a different path to avoid the actual obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a definite reflection in the inner organism of the outer world, and I think that's what you're trying to allude to, an attempt to capture by the inner space, the outer space. And, and there's a limitation to
so
that,
like
right?
an amoeba mashing around an obstacle like a pebble or I don't know what, some dust speck. An amoeba goes into it, feels it, so it has to go around. Now the video I watched was not an amoeba, I don't think, but let's generalize. Laying out an example, and this is kind of interesting.
We would be generalizing here.
But so even though the environment of things mashing together is different from the inner environment, I guess.
Yeah.
We like the neural network kind of ideas.
But even the chemical network.
This is the chemical network that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that gets reflected up to something like an earthworm hits a rock, right? So like it needs.
Well, an earthworm is already neurologically.
That's what I mean. So then that's what we would like to be talking about here.
Neurons.
And saying
neurons are a consequence of size, because with size, you need to move shit around in the inner environment, and in order to do that, you need the electrical signals to also pulse and move shit around. So the musculature.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not just the chemicals that are just diffusing and sending.
But it can start there. We can start with that idea and extrapolate to the neurological.
Yeah.
Which would do, because the neurons form in a body that is to reflect that body.
So what I wanted to point out is that these neurological networks, or even these chemical networks, they aren't equivalent to that environment that's quote unquote outside.
They're representative.
The representative, and
to a degree.
They never will be equivalent, but this is what the self does. The self as an object often is taken as if, yes, this is the equivalent.
So the self is part of a narrative, so you got to remember, don't bring the self
so
this
we
low.
Forget.
There's no self in this picture that we drew so far.
I know, I'm trying to pull that analogy because it's perfect. The neural network is uncertain as to its composition as an exact reflection of isomorphism between its inner and outer, right? That will never be
And the neural
perfect.
network only is the representative of the body. The body is the thing that feeds the neural network representations of the world external to it. So the eyes feed the neural system the information. So it's twice removed. The only thing it's reflecting is the eyes. The only thing it's reflecting is the actual nerves in the fingers, but it's the chemistry in the fingers that relays tactile information by depression and whatnot, which is the reflection of the environment outside. So already with the neurological system, you can see that it is a representation of something that it's built from already, right? It's a representation of the inner environment of which it is a part, while the rest of the body is a representation of either more environmental effects or internal processes to deal with digestion and whatever else have your immune system and
So
other elements.
What I was trying to do here is create an analogical path or metaphorical path to, I think, adaptability. And what happens I'm like talking at the experiential level of feeling, having a self, an ego, being pushed through these levers through the system, you become crusted.
So so you have
crust is a problem.
So you have another element here in that within the neural network now, even though you're getting information directly from the body, it's of the external environment, and so you tend to mistake the representation for the actual thing.
Mm-hmm.
The accuracy of it is not being questioned. I'm sure that to a degree there is an accuracy to it, otherwise survival would be a very questionable ordeal.
Mm-hmm. So, and this crustiness and ability to crust, I think, is at the heart of what propels the self and the ego continually. And this is like we wanted to talk about the fundamentals of the self and what's...
Well, when you talk about crustiness, let's point out that we're talking about the crustiness of these further down the road mental representation of the external world, and the crustiness is that even though the world is shifting, the internal representation is not, and this is what we mean by like it's calcified and hardened against it. We're not defining an actual, like it's a metaphor again. Mm-hmm. And it's in relation to that specificity, like the representation of the twice removed external world as a solid ground, and fighting against, so to speak, anything that could change that representation, despite the fact that the shift in the world is actually happening.
Yep. And like down at the amoeba level, you're having different potentially genetics creating slight variations among a culture, and those that can't survive the environment shifting or a different environment, they just don't exist anymore. But that's an adaptability kind of thing, sort of quote unquote built into these lower layers. That life keeps going around.
Your options are limited.
We need to analogize that up the stacks, that there is an adaptability that keeps happening. We're not just getting stuck in a routine 9-to-5 job, blah blah, get my groceries, do this chore.
The main benefit of moving representation away from chemistry into an ongoing electrical signal kind of representation is that it's far more malleable. It's far more responsive, and so the same body type now has a potential increase in its capacity to handle different environments by simply shifting more dynamic representations of it. And if you take that to the extreme, you can extrapolate how the dynamic representation of it could take full-on hold as the dominant representational mode.
Right, the breakaways.
AKA the human, who then utilizes that to either break away or continue the cycle within the next phase of grand mastery. Grand mastery of that. And whatever emerges out of that, we don't need to deal with what emerges out of that specifically because we're not in that layer.
Right.
It doesn't matter what we think of it, is what I mean.
Yeah, I just had to share the link, so I got kind of distracted.
That's okay, I gotta go pee.
Apologies, and sure, fine then. It is a break time, and we shall be right back. Oh, we're back.
Right? But the real stepping over that horizon is where everything becomes tokenized, and that is where the human archetype is separate from the animal. And the initial shift towards everything being tokenized is still isomorphic with the experiential, because the first things that get tokens are qualities: love, life, art, things that already are in existence, just representations of things that are. And so you don't really get dysmorphism out of that alone. So, and the human archetype is not necessarily different or bad or there's not a problem there in itself. But once you have a nice collection of tokens, you have a machine that is the pattern of these tokens running together. Now, the difference being is that while initially the tokens are emergent, now they are being the patterns of tokens become a sort of another layer that emerges at the top of that. And once that layer emerges, there's a push down of meaning. So long as all these tokens, or sound bites as we used to call them, are isomorphic.
Still do.
Are isomorphic. Whatever pushes down is isomorphic, and there's no real big deal going on. The responsive nature is immediate, and any lack of concern is made itself manifest real quick. And this is what we call in science survival of the fittest. That's where fitness comes in the focus discussion, or the areas of concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I get it. There's something that needs to be done to take care of how you reify back down onto the stack.
So you can't just willy-nilly pick patterns that do or do not work. You don't use the responses from nature.
Thank you for the monologue / lecture, and I think it's good and important to have those. And you know what? Only hardcore people, I guess you could say, hardcore community, and who of those who have a free Sunday afternoon are able to really participate in this chat, but and they would appreciate such lectures. But I was just thinking about how when we do the transcript, it becomes searchable. So now I can search for a human archetype, and this discussion comes up, right? So it's great to flesh it out and all that, and I think we're doing a good on that. And of course there are many implications of this, and it's easy to keep rambling on and on and on, but
So
we wanted
we'll
to
leave you with
do
one
the
note.
fundamentals of
I want to leave you with one
the
note.
self and the tether.
Is that what I just described is the same thing as externalization. The offloading of the chemical mechanisms onto the neurological ones, and then the neurological ones taking complete control over of representation for everything to do with it. Now, it's almost to the point that in the human you can ignore your body.
Mm-hmm. We see that many mistakes are made even at the upper layers, and
The rest is how the narrative is
all
spun.
coming down to that chemical that the chemical wins ultimately in the whole game of things. If you pardon me, if you look at how the chemical ended up, you know why the neural failed.
Sure.
You know? Yeah. Just it goes all the way up the stack. The top has to take care of the bottom. This is the loop, you know?
Well, yeah, if we follow the morphology of an animal and stuff like that, it certainly has to have reflections of its own environment and integrated into itself. We don't see that with the human because we're generalized for every environment at this point in our evolution.
That was the hugest burp.
I know. We're generalists for every environment, and so obviously you're not going to see a reflection of any environment in our body anymore. We're too far away from all of them.
Okay, we know the problem. We can just keep bemoaning and talking endlessly about the implications.
This is not about the problem. The whole point was to give credence to the entire funhouse structure, to say that there is a built-in self-reference. This built-in self-reference plays a role in the conceit calculation.
See, there is a built-in self-reference.
Well,
Okay,
yes,
it
with
does.
this layering of reflection of the environment from the outside inwards.
What you're saying is when we look down the layers, we can see layers that have been constructed with self-reference built in.
To the whole. Self-reference to the whole.
They're all like that, and if they weren't, it wouldn't work.
Right.
and
The
we
system
wouldn't
has to
here.
be self-maintained because everything has to reflect
So
the
this
inner
isn't,
environment
we're
in
not
terms
adding,
of the outer
we're not
environment.
adding something and saying, oh, you have to discover your true inner self-reference.
No, we are explaining that this is a built-in mechanism that is part of the processing mechanism that brings out experience to the fore for you. The sense of self emerges from that. Why it feels so intuitively correct, for example.
Right.
But the rest of this has got to do more with the supplied narratives up after the fact that come back and reinforce in a feedback loop. And this reinforcement is habituation and also the very same tethering that we've alluded to before, which we now have more descriptive ways of approaching.
Right. Yeah, so I want to get into that today. I also just want to note that we kind of jumped the gun at the very start of this session. We're already 25 minutes in, and we didn't really recap what we've been doing or what we did last time.
Got excited. We can do that. We should.
I don't know if, or we can just say, because we kind of alluded to, or said about that we had already talked about a bunch of these self-topics like temperament and degrees of coherence.
Well, we had a fairly
domains of progress.
We had fairly short meetings, so we could maybe complete that and then move on with the recap to the next meeting.
Well, the thing is, I only remember up to certain vague points about,
Are you faulting me for that?
No, I'm just so we can start again with the last. This is meeting, I think, book meeting number 8 or something, 7. That's been 6. I don't know. It's been going on for a bit.
Let's do it. If that's what you need, if we need to recap, let's recap. I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah, well, I think it could help. So
we had a problem with our last meeting because we didn't reiterate about the self at all in terms of where the fuck it comes from or why it's even there.
Yeah,
so I just wanted to get through that.
That's the context of this, yeah.
I just wanted to get through that because past the self-reference that's already built in, we have the conceit calculation, which injects a self-object into the narrative.
Right.
And that has to do with a spectacular mode that jets along the next proximity complex that for the moment calculation. And so we need to kind of complete that whole. I know I said a bunch of gibberish to a lot of people, but yeah.
And yep, in the context of the book, we're at a point where we need to kind of shore up all that's needed to go to, when people talk about you have to work on yourself fix yourself before you fix the world. We're at the fix yourself part of everything that should have to be included quickly, just from a Portal Mountain perspective, and moving on from there. And
the reason for self before other should be clarified too. In particular, with the psychosis and neurosis approaches.
Right. So that's another thing.
If you pour that out into the mix, that's supposed to resolve those specific problems, you're just pouring more fuel onto a fire, kind of deal.
And I think we brought up the sadomasochist scale earlier, didn't we? Market machine, spectrum of stupidity. Maybe we did. Maybe we didn't. But anyways, I kind of wanted to just take a moment to slow down, to just put into a greater context what we need from this self section, and just run down the book. So what we have so far here, we have section 1, a preface, whatever. So this is the book. We're just going to run over the book real quick here.
The how to read this book and how to not How to not give the criticism that's gonna fall on deaf ears.
All right.
Sorry, I had to say it that way because the point being here is that we're not reaching out for an essay or an exposition that is strictly academic,
Right.
but rather we are creating something out of our own experience.
Mm-hmm.
And
we do have some sources, but it's not a source like I'm referring to this page in that concept or whatever.
yeah, again,
Although we do.
if this was a proof, I can see that being the case, but this is not a proof. And
Mhm.
there's
Right.
it's simply not an articulation that.
And by proof, you mean like a logically mechanistic thing that slots into an existing system.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless
This isn't that.
unless that system is your own experience, which again is not an academic proposition.
So this reminds me of a problem we've had always, I think, in our history of conveying the quote-unquote importance or significance of our work. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh God.
So
like,
the preface is mostly probably going to be like, don't read this book unless.
Yeah.
Unless you're not looking for these types.
And
of
then,
things.
so notice we're beginning in section 2 here, the bootstrap as we called, with the zeitgeist. So a description of like there's something missing. You know, everybody seems to probably be able to relate to the fact that we're not treating the earth right, that it just
each other
all together
right? Like
don't
you
treat
don't
each
know
other
your
right.
neighbors.
Somehow it's all very seems destructive.
The fact that a family can be broken up on a whim due to extrinsic pressures
Right.
of society.
Yeah, it's so tough, man. Just financially can cause breakups and like a slippery slope into poverty and all this, and cycles of poverty through generations.
Well, there's all that, but a more fundamental, crucial point to the zeitgeist is that isolation is increasing. People are disconnected from people and more connected to mechanisms to supplant the lack.
Mm-hmm.
And like many authors before us pointed out, there's an unlife encroaching onto the living experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, in other words, most of the living experience is preoccupied with mechanisms that have nothing to do with living.
Right. And this is again from that breakaway condition we were just talking about, where there's not a good isomorphism between the inner and the outer of neural, like what the neural map is and what the quote-unquote reality, sensed reality is.
Well, if we're piggybacking on what I was talking about, how it builds up from the outside towards the inside, and as more complexity is added into the system,
Mm-hmm.
we got to a point in which the very inner system is so self-reliant that it has zero it's currently left with a zero representation of the real world around it, apart from bits and pieces that have survived through the ages.
Well, here's the thing.
Just
Here's the problem.
incidentally.
You're subjecting yourself again to, back to that chemical world, of where how you adapt is by dying. By crusting up this APS, you become like that amoeba again. Because the only way that's ever going to stop is if you die. You're kind of putting yourself back into that unit, the whole unit of like I am my DNA.
Oh, I think I see what you're saying. If your neural representation is very
becomes static.
is very static.
Static to yourself. Yeah.
Then it's as if you're back into the same mode as the amoeba,
Of living as an
in
amoeba.
which the only real
The recourse for
the-
change. The only way to change.
is the actual chemical environment, and if it's too, and if you're too rigid to it, it just kills you because you're not adaptive
Mhm.
enough. And so
Exactly.
the argument is that representation internally must be more flexible so that the same
Mhm.
body type can actually adapt to different environments.
Correct. And how do you reintroduce that flexibility? That's what our work is about.
Which is the
and so how could you
origin
possibly
of the system existing in the first place, or the complexity existing.
how could you ever overstate the significance of that?
No, you can't. Yeah.
Could not.
If you follow
Impossible.
this train of thought, then there's no excuses there.
Nice. What do they call that? Exposition. You got it, man. The amoeba analogy. We have become like amoebas. Or viruses. Or whatever. Just subject to you are what your DNA is. You do it.
Except
You
now
either
that
live or die.
DNA is a really, really rigid cultural reference categorization schema. This is
Mhm.
taboo. This
Right.
is allowed. This
Exactly.
is taboo. This is allowed. This is taboo. This is allowed.
Yeah. The fact that it stays that way relatively.
And mind you, we're not ranting against established moralities again of don't take shit from other people, don't hurt them, and all of that stuff. Obviously, those will still remain taboos, but for a different reason than a rule set. Right? Like those are emergent properties of what's going on. So
Mhm.
they don't disappear just because the abstract rule set around them is flexible. That's
Right.
kind of the point.
And just because you achieve quote unquote membership in the guild doesn't mean that all your old habits aren't going to die hard. Or that you're not still going to be the life living with all your memories that you were before
Mhm.
it happened.
Yeah,
No,
this
it's
is
still there. And
Yeah.
that's when we get into the charlatan section next. So, as an introduction, we've bound together these two topics. The zeitgeist, to say there's all these kinds of things going on that many people can, if not all of us, can relate to, and we're all excited to do something about it because it sucks.
Yeah.
It frickin' sucks. And
So
now along comes a charlatan and supposes to fix it for you.
I have the perfect description for the charlatan in this context, and it's basically the person who capitalizes on the zeitgeist and is sitting there and is attempting to further the zeitgeist, not by being explicit about it, but by trying to say, oh, let's take those problems piecemeal and produce solutions.
So it can be even like a good faith type of effort,
Mhm.
but it's isolated and ultimately
Plays into this very same system that the
it's
zeitgeist
like ultimately
is
a recuperating force.
yeah. So when
Band-aid.
so
The Band-Aid
before we
effect.
used to talk about trinkets. So the charlatan will be the guy, the person to pretend to identify with the zeitgeist, whatever the personal expression of it might be for the individuals, whatever
Mhm.
the soul might be longing for, as it were. Because if you remember, soul and zeitgeist is the social and the individual qualities of the same phenomenon. So as a charlatan approaches, assesses what your soul is in lack of, and tries to sell you a commodity to supplant
Right.
that whole.
Based on your particular complaint,
Mhm.
you become a market to that.
For that, yeah. And so the charlatan is actually indistinguishable from the rest of the system. It just simply operates on the capital of the zeitgeist in a more direct way. Whereas in a
Mhm.
more indirect way would be to cause insecurities about one's looks and then sell them a razor.
Yeah. Another point about the charlatan is that we in our work, as we describe it, appears as if from a charlatan. There can't really be distinction
Well,
to
yes.
sound bites. It's how you interpret it. So we're kind of acknowledging that we come off as charlatans,
So this would be
and anybody does. Everybody with their own system.
that's a consequence of the presentation being also enveloped in a soundbite, which is
Right.
which is the same medium.
and can be interpreted so many ways.
It's absolute no. Well, yeah. The other parts to the medium is the protocol. If you read the signals in the wrong protocol, it goes to naught. So charlatanism works by sending the correct signals under the wrong protocol. So yeah, they say the same things, but in a way that's supposed to be interpreted in a different manner. So
Mm-hmm.
to put it in a different context is that they lay out a different universe upon which these signals need to be
Well,
interpreted.
the system ultimately feeds a different something else.
The market, the
not
physicist,
the guild.
the way it works is by changing the shape of the market to be the protocol. So instead of a dynamic protocol in the moment, right? The protocol has already been downloaded from the market already, and therefore it's easy for it to reify this same garbage.
Mm.
And that's fair. That's how people lead themselves astray by thinking that they've got the good solution to something and then being stuck in their own world, to which we're also susceptible.
Sure. Yep. But
The key is how do we not be charlatans to ourselves and a further extension
there's
to
many
others.
there's many kind of layers to what we're doing here. For one, we're friends. We love chatting about this. Period. We just do it all day. But so we've got a friendship. We've got this work
Rapport.
on the guild, the rapport, which the work has been happening for like how many years? Like just of our like solid like 8 years, I think, of getting serious. Like that's when you first started, you know,
The meetings on the balcony.
um, trying to get me to do Buddhist meditations and stuff. You know, like that's when we first kind of like.
Yeah, when I believe the context.
remember I was working
The context there is that
working
you
at the
had
bank.
0 reference points at that point.
Pretty much,
And I
yeah.
kind of
Atheist raised.
when I already kind of had developed some.
Long time ago, but
Mhm.
that's when I feel like we started taking it seriously. Like
What I'm happier about is that it didn't have to stay in Buddhist parlance at all. Like, aside from the conceit, like, how many terms do you know that are straight up from Buddhism right now? Maybe self.
not too many.
Maybe self. But self
That's
is
an
so
easy one.
ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Ubiquitous.
Ubiquitous.
Ubiquitous. I'm happy with it because it doesn't have to rely the essence of it doesn't have to rely on a particular presentation.
Mm-hmm.
It can take a presentation that is
Yeah.
more.
So and then we decided to make it into a particular presentation, and that's kind of like the Portal Mountain stuff, and that's maybe started in its real like reality like 4 years ago now since we started the chat room.
Yeah, you
Like,
you
that's
made up
crazy.
a drawing.
And it was like
stuff.
it was a couple years before that, and we were already like having meetings and shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So there's what I'm saying is there's a lot of things layered together, and in it, describing this is a form of magic, I think.
Yeah.
Because we're accurately describing reality. We're just telling you what we're doing here, what we're up to.
And so, back to your point about charlatanism, I think we can wrap it up, is that, unfortunately for us, in some sense, the soundbite, the many of the sound bites, let's say,
Mhm.
amount to sound bites that are parallel, part and parcel, part and parcel,
Part and parcel.
part and
Mhm.
parcel with genuine charlatans, people who
And
aim
this
to,
is
to make money off
the
of it.
cliche factor. When you trigger somebody's cliche alert, it's like, no, it's something you're already doing. Like just let go of what's extra.
Just let
You know, just stop doing the extra, and you'll reveal what you're already doing.
all of these phrases. Yes, just all of these phrases. There definitely are up there. And again, the discussion about the charlatan begins and ends with it's the same signals, but the protocol we use for interpreting them must be different in order for there to see the difference between a charlatan and a non. Now, that's when we can get into the discussion of coherence
Last
being the
couple meetings we went over that.
yeah, the discussion of coherence being that measure engage, and which has to do with their coherence, and by extension your own, because the recognition of one is basically the recognition of the other.
Mm-hmm.
So either you smarten up and get rid of the charlatan, or it's not a charlatan and you smarten up.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's the third possibility: you don't smarten
Right.
up, and the charlatan takes advantage of
Like,
you.
just off on a limb, but no charlatan would ever tell you how to detect a charlatan.
That's what a
like-
charlatan would say.
A charlatan would say that, and then if you're not the one who doesn't investigate that claim, then you're a mark.
Fair enough. Anyway, there's only so much that can be said with words about that. So the rest of the discussion would be about rapport, trust, faith, and the like to delineate where one can start becoming more sure of whether one is a charlatan or not. And then really,
Right.
the discussion just goes: let them build up their rapport. That rapport will yield whether you trust them or not. And that trust will yield whether there is faith
Man,
in
oh
what they're
man.
saying.
See, this is why we have to.
So there
we
is
have to
so
start
there is
with
so there is a responsibility involved, and this is that responsibility: the ability to respond to, taking them for understanding the rapport, the responsibility for either gaining or not gaining the trust, and if there is a trust gained, the responsibility of putting faith into, aka faith being the soundbite we described way before, giving space the moment
Mhm.
to see its feedback. All of those things are
Right, and that's participation. That amounts to participation, and hopefully it would lead to that aha moment, the eureka of membership.
this is the actions necessary to expose coherence, and and then from there the increase of the coherence. At some point, coherence will end with a charlatan.
Mm-hmm. Yep, gotcha. So for the rest of this book, I just want to kind of jump us ahead.
Or will come to hostility.
Jump us ahead maybe a bit. Coherence, the degrees of, coherence and hostility.
Yeah, the charlatan will either stick you in the guest mode, or your participation will amount to a lot of
Right, yeah.
adversity.
Right, but they're not going to sit there and give you a chart that says
How to navigate that.
you might just be stuck at guess because I'm shoving you there. By the way, here's the chart. Like, that's a little incongruent. I don't know how that would work. Maybe like a dark...
The idea is that they would reveal themselves. Through
Yeah,
these
like
steps.
even that could be, like kind of a more Joker type of approach.
And we would reveal ourselves with this approach too. If we were to be a charlatan, everything we say from here would be an attempt to co-opt
Yeah, we know we're right.
the zeitgeist.
We know we're right.
Anyway,
So moving through the book here,
we encountered
the next two major sections, starting with coherence. One was polymorphic machine and market machine. So this book introduces you to
sections.
some very basic section, like a introduction section, and then moves into like a juxtaposition between the polymorphic machine. So this is like just a generic description of life itself, the complex adaptive.
Well, yeah,
almost getting
I've
in-
already jumped into coherence because that's what.
Yeah,
the-
complex
that-
adaptive systems.
That's where the charlatan is exposed, and the reason, and we can move into section 3 because the underlying mechanism under which the charlatan is exposed is the very same polymorphic machine, which requires
Mhm.
that responsibility.
Exactly. So next we're describing what would detect a charlatan.
So the idea of coherence and the ability to understand, navigate coherence, and then realizing that there is a dream, exposition of how to perceive things, and then
Being constructed.
and then
You can observe its construction.
and then contrasting that with the moment that constructs it to begin with. So that leads into that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the chronology overview will be a great overview as to how over time how the existence in the moment that is isomorphic to the dream, aka purely mythological existence in tribal form, moving it through phases of commodification.
Mm-hmm. See, now
into plateaus.
you're totally right. That's where that goes. I don't know that this section belongs in there. It may just not have been moved, right? But that's...
Well, it does belong there because section 4 is going to be about what has been created out of all of this, right?
Right. Now, wait a minute. Shouldn't this be in this section?
Hold on. I can move with this.
It should be moved
for now.
down.
I can move with this. Hold on. The chronology overview is going to give you an overview as to how the ontological matrix took foothold and built up to be the more dominant representation of everything.
Right. Okay. Now,
and then I don't know why meta-religion and animism is there, because it doesn't seem to fit
complex
that bill.
adaptive systems. That was the end. That's before we get into market machine.
But before we get into the market machine, we already got there, because we've already said the chronology has built up the plateaus of commodification. Then the ontological matrix took hold, and the ontological matrix that took hold looks like the market machine. And the market machine operates within the spectrum of stupidity, with the artificial scarcity being the main thing. Between artificial scarcity and the ego agent matrix, we can pause, because the ego agent matrix is pushing off of the ontological matrix above. We can pause here and inject meta-religion animism as the backdrop for scarcity that we just described. Because we're going to go, the market machine looks like this, the ontological matrix looks like this market machine in which we have like these exchanges of commodities for currency.
Yeah, no, you're right. We've actually...
That makes for a spectrum of stupidity of some sense.
But that happens...
And the stupidity is because there's a very scarce things that you can which you can trade with. There's a push for that. And then describe where that scarcity really arises from.
I think we've laid that out, and I think what you said here about as a backdrop for this meta-religion being a backdrop, that's why that's here before market machine section. It's to serve as a backdrop. Then it should be a prelude. Something breakaway is emerging.
It should be a prelude because it doesn't belong to either section.
Now, what I wanted to do in polymorphic machine is describe just generically life.
Put this as the first section.
Chronology is systemic. Like it's in a bad light.
Yes, but chronology is the process of the polymorphic machine slowly being crushed by a process over time.
Then that fits.
And that ontological matrix, the one we see, is the net full-blown net result.
But wait, now here's my question:
Wasn't rule-based society?
Isn't ontological matrix something available to society for all time, basically? Like to value certain
yes.
things.
Implicitly, yes, but it's
you
never.
have to communicate by sound bites.
But there was never like. There was my stories that I would tell you, which would use the same, say, deities and spirits and whatnot for reference points.
I get that there was medicine.
There's your story. We're in the same tribe.
Yeah.
We've known each other lifelong. Then there's your stories to me with the same deities that mean completely different fucking things to you. And at no point do we need to argue about whether we are discussing the exact same ontological, in the same matrix. Because my narrative isn't based on your ontology, and your narrative isn't based on my ontology. It's just that
Mhm.
our narratives mesh
It's kind of like you're like
past the fact.
just like universal beings just existing in proximity.
Right. There is no offloading of my there's no
Mhm.
need to offload my context to you
I
because
got it.
because what happens instead is that we just immediately share
So
whatever
then
context we're in.
This
We don't need to do it explicitly.
meta-religion and complex adaptive systems, does that depend on this discussion about ontological matrix? Because
No.
it came before.
No, it does not.
Doesn't depend on it.
No, what it is necessary for is to express where there is an abundance and how that abundance got taken away, which has already been described in the spectrum of stupidity.
Right. An abundance and where it got, taken away, the generic.
So chronology just gives us a generic process, and I think we can end. Let's see. Generic process that ends with an ontological matrix, right? And then we should start section 4 with the meta-religion and animism to sort of piggyback of redescribing the ontological matrix and the complex adaptive system, and then use that to define artificial scarcity. So instead of having it down here, move it right as the first starting point.
Okay, I think things can get moved around.
Yeah, just move it up.
Well, the thing is,
Or move it down.
it's sections in a document, so then I gotta move the sections.
No, you don't need to move the sections. I'm saying move the last bit of section 3 to be the first bit of section 4. Chronologically, it's still the same.
This one?
Yeah.
Wait,
Just move
so
it down.
let's just pretend that we can change that.
Yeah, and then remove what you added earlier.
This part.
Yeah, we don't need it anymore.
Okay, removed.
Like that.
And
So it's the same flow.
okay. Yeah, I was almost wondering if this should be before chronology about the meta-religion. And can we separate meta-religion, animism, and complex adaptive systems? Are these two separate things? Like, because they're mashed right together.
It depends on
like-
what you want to say. Like, what do you want to discuss with meta-religion? What do you want to discuss with complex adaptive systems?
And with that, we'll be right back for a short break.
Sorry. To explain scarcity, we don't only need We need animism. We will need complex adaptive system as the underlying animistic structure. We will also need to build up on the self, conceit, so self-reference, conceit, self, and ego. We need to build that arc to ego. So our conversation today,
Self-ego, yeah.
our conversation today, where it started from, is this.
I think we probably wrote that down way long time ago, too.
And the reason being, sorry, I'm just going to walk around a little bit.
That's fine.
The reason being that we need that, we need to get to ego as a construct, as an articulated representation, is because for artificial scarcity to make sense, you have to have built the commodity world from the previous section to begin with, and then create an artificial dashboard of trade, which is tethered to said ego as like this is the self that matters for which is trading within that market. So it's the other component of it. So unless you have buy-in to the scarcity that's provided, i.e. An entity that only is ever interested in commodifications, or commodities rather, unless you have that specific narrow
driver,
scarcity
demand driver.
If you have both sides of that equation, you have an ongoing artificial scarcity process and system going on.
Now, I'm not sure how much we wanted to work on the existing sections, ordering and all that, because we've been through this before, and I'll say I have trouble finding the time in all this to listen back to our conversation.
So
try.
all this means is that this needs to move up. The ego agent matrix discussion needs to move up.
What
so
I'm
that
saying
artificial
is
scarcity makes sense.
we need to work on this right now, because I won't be able to listen to it later and suddenly
That's what I'm doing.
I'll change this.
That's what I'm doing. I'm telling you.
That's what I'm saying. So like, it's a good idea
Move
to
ego up.
Ego agent matrix.
Yeah. We've
Up
already
where?
we've already subscribed to the ontological matrix.
And where does this have to go? Before artificial scarcity, as
Right before.
as a dependent of it.
Yeah.
Or-
It leads in ego leads into artificial scarcity because
Yeah, right.
it's the second side of the equation.
Totally right there. Yeah.
And it also creates.
Now, did
And
accounting come before artificial scarcity?
So ego. hold on. Ego being a singular entity, if you will, right?
Sure.
Juxtaposed against the ontological matrix, gives us
Yeah.
agencies in the matrix.
Yeah.
So we end here with the ontological matrix. We provide a bit more backdrop for. See, this one doesn't fit now.
So what if we take that chunk and put it after that?
No. That's fine. That was fine where it was.
Oh.
It might actually come before the meta religion, but it's not in that section.
Because just the titling of these sections, because I was thinking of this as polymorphic, this as market.
No, you're right, but we're not interested in. Here, we're still describing everything polymorphic, but on the flip side, in the operating system world. Here, we're describing everything pre-operating system leading up to that breakdown. And how it can circumvent everything here. So, caste is probably before meta-religion.
Okay. And grammatical capacities?
Yes.
So just put that before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And the spectrum of stupidity should go after artificial scarcity or accounting even.
Yeah.
Hold on. After ego stacking, actually.
We were going to bring up the spectrum and neuropsychosis. After what? This one?
Okay, let me just think.
So we were going to bring in the discussion about psychosis and neurosis too. And I don't know if that goes here, although, well, yeah.
Yeah, we go here after animism.
Okay.
Hold on. Let me think.
The spectrum of stupidity. Well, it's fundamental. It's even before you can have an ego agent matrix.
Right. Yep.
So it was where it
The
should go.
spectrum of stupidity will involve the psychosis and neurosis discussion, so that's good. Okay, I'm
Yep.
down.
Cool. So, market machine section, and then guild. I don't know if you want to keep going through that chronology. Like, I don't know.
I don't know what the
Do
market...
we want to revisit this last section here, or just carry on to what our current section we've been talking about, guild dynamics, kind of the down to earth, what do we do now? Just jump into that.
If we are doing the...
Because like it's great that we've been reviewing the book again, and we've totally dived in farther than I had expected as far as a summary and all that. But we made some important changes, which is great. But we can come back to the self and then try to move to the society again.
All right, so what do you want to do here?
I kind of wanted to just skip the end of this section, forget about that for now, and come to guild dynamics, preface to practice, focus, introduction, domains of progress, field manual, and then I had social here later on. So like we have a bunch of things jumbled up, and I don't know the ordering of that too. And
It's hard to comment on it without going through the actual full...
Can we at least see if anything is missing from this table of contents here? Why don't I just copy it and then edit the copy? So we brought up this topic now about psychosis and neurosis. How do we isn't there a practice that that addresses that, the tether, a practice that addresses the tether, because
Focus.
we've clinically described it here in the market machine as part of that. We're going to get into that with the spectrum of stupidity, right? But so what part actually deals with that focus? And is that an important section to have here, like talk about affect and like altruism? You know, like bring this into the mix at this point. Like we need to somehow tell people or like give tools.
So personally, this is me thinking. Personally, when it comes to the discussion about affect and the discussion of altruism, which is part of the affect, is all tied to the affect chart and its delineation between shuffling the conceit calculation into a narrative and the lack of doing so, and also the lack of doing so being shuffled into the conceit calculation of the narrative after the fact. So there's all these different dynamics into which affect can go into play. On the one end of the spectrum, it's simply recognized as the quality of the moment feeding into the narrative of the next moment. On the other hand, it could be it's part of the quality of a specific ongoing narrative in which there is attachment, aversion, and uh, this disregard with regard to the ongoing moment.
Mm-hmm. Typical.
So without that delineation, it's very difficult to describe affect in any meaningful way as a quality.
Come on, you're looking comfortable there.
My neck wasn't.
Yeah. Affect as a meaningful quality.
So we need to get into the meat of self-reference to ego to nail down affect and its role in the psychosis and neurosis.
Right.
Neurosis specifically and psychosis as an outcome.
So I'm having a feeling like this all can be really detailed, and maybe this is why I ran away from that document, was that this all really, I think, belongs somewhere here.
Yeah, it's a really, really, really dry sort of discussion to
Yeah.
get to the heart of the matter as
Right.
to what the.
So we're actually going back a section right now just to backfill of what we realized was missing in order to move forward through self into society.
Mm-hmm. Because if you don't have a good orientation with regard to what's meant by the word self,
Right.
it's going to hit the same snag that it hits everywhere
Yeah.
else. So
Yeah, okay,
a
so
meaningless
that's-
term.
This is actually a huge discovery, I guess. This void that we missed, like the fundamental part of it. We did little sections and stuff here and
The
there.
good news is that we do have a solid model for making sure that what we actually mean by the word self is going to eventually get clarified.
Now, does this feel like our kind of strongest issue right now, is laying that out? Because even though this belongs in a previous section, we were expecting it in this section of the book, and we were going to talk about it and flesh it out, right? For this meeting. So I'm thinking that it's fair to backtrack
So the reason that's
for the sake of this topic.
Yeah. So the reason that's happening specifically is because we have to arrive at ego. To get into ego stacking, to get into death circles, to get into which is like,
Mhm.
a death circle is another reformulation of the flame diagram.
Yep.
So
Right.
to get into all of these ego-based dynamics, if you will, as to how the market machine is tethered into that dashboard interface of push this button, get reward,
Mhm.
push that button, get punishment,
Yeah.
to make it all smooth, if you will.
How the body is controlled.
You need to get to ego, you need to get to ego splitting out into agencies across the ontological matrix, and then have to see how all of that tapestry of ego was weaved together into different castles in the sky of war, revolution, and the other component of stacking itself of the nuclear family diagram, and then the consequences of all of this is the Tower of Babel diagram. Right, like, so you have a constant crash into the ground, you have a constant build-up through the family up into the void through the father, pseudo-father, which is vacant of anything except the empty shell of a husk. All
Right.
of these different things, you need an ego to actually
Right. Exactly.
paint those pictures.
And we haven't really connected the dots.
No, so we
in
need to
that
connect.
section.
We need to connect the dots to the ego. The ego gets us connected to the ontological, reconnected to the ontological matrix as agents, and agents, as are the enactors of the entire system of the market machine, pulling all the levers and providing all the levers at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the obvious structuring of different agents with regards to ego structures. So all of that,
Yeah.
all of that is the market machine
Mm-hmm.
accounting for all of that. So death circles,
Right.
That circles are part and parcel of that conversation. The ego flame is part and parcel. I just mentioned those two.
Mhm. Yeah, and the ordering isn't, it's kind of unclear in this section here, but
Yeah, and accounting would be just the reification of all meaning into number, of all words into numbers. So destroying everything except for the
Mhm.
currency values.
And doesn't that actually come right after a spectrum of stupidity? Because how do you have an ego agent matrix in society?
Yeah, you launder
That's
you
accounting,
launder
right?
everything, and now you have
Is it not? I'm gonna do it. Tell me it's not. I did it.
you launder everything, and now you got like automaton ego agent an ego agent matrix of automatons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
Running through an
I mean,
artificially scarce.
you know what? Like, officially, I think this meeting has just become about fixing up the market machine section because it's missing out on some pieces.
Well, it's a complex issue.
And the pieces come up when we're in this, what we've called so far guild dynamics section. We are finding a bunch of practices, meditations, things to do, practical. And the question comes up, why do you do this? Why? What is the purpose? What was damaged in the past? What am I remediating? Right? So that has to be set up before we get into, okay, here's the things we're going to do, basically. And we got to come back to the market machine section and fix it up a little bit.
I think we're through this section, though. What's next?
The section, well, what's next is getting into discussion on the self and how it's tethered and what that means.
So, the discussion of neurosis.
Yeah, neurosis and psychosis.
Pull up Telegram and search neurosis. That'll help me.
Okay. What do you want to search for?
What does it say?
What, the last thing that you said? Neurosis is actually the underpinning mechanism of ego and soul/psyche.
Next one. Next one up. Keep searching.
Psychosis would be the degree of legitimacy of the dream that justifies the neurosis with sound bites that both reward and punish, as well as weave a moment-to-moment market
scroll up a little.
for the commodities that suppress pain and catalyze pleasure. And I had it as neurosis being characterized more or less by the Wikipedia.
Oh, up.
Like, scroll up.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, your initial description?
Mm-hmm. Look, you just passed it.
On Reddit. And then did I ask for the...
Hold on, you're
the
scrolling too
wiki?
fast.
I mean,
just
we're in a
stop
different
moving.
spot than I thought. Stop moving.
Okay, so neurosis being characterized more or less. Then the next one, what does it say? Psychosis is the legitimacy. Keep going.
Down?
Yeah, keep going, keep going. Might use the list of this. Commodities either internalized. There, I just was reading it.
Pardon? Okay, we're in good shape here.
Did. It's making me think of sadism and masochism as the types of commodities supplied by the market. So they're commodities, so either to internalize as reward, pleasure, catalyst, or as punishment, pain suppression. What does it say afterwards?
You may take the mouse. Mass psychosis. We've defined mass psychosis better than that stupid poopy pants Matthias Desmet. Yeah, my French braid.
Right. So the idea is that the market offers two commodifications to deal with pain.
Mm-hmm.
One can be as taken as sadism. You take the
So
pain.
a conversion mechanism converting pain into pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Right. One is you take the pain upon yourself. One is you give it out to another, and
Push
it
down,
generates
push
into
it down
pleasure.
the hill.
Right.
And yeah, if you internalize the pain, it's like those guys that hit themselves for being sinners or something like that, to punish
Right.
themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Or-
punishment is like
Or set yourself up on the market for somebody needs a sadist or whatever,
yeah.
or somebody needs a masochist. You pair up.
Yeah,
There you go.
and you shouldn't think of it as like one
Like a
covers all.
relationship. One like a.
Like you're both at the different times for different reasons.
Mhm. We have a very
With a more-
committed
with a more
sadomasochist
dominant,
relationship.
with the more dominant sides expressing themselves more prominently. I guess I don't know. Some are more blended, some are not.
Mhm. We need to make the blended ones illegal.
Anyway, the point there is that this is the mechanism by which the tether supplies itself instead of recognizing this as part of affect or
So right,
official
this
narrative.
whole tether idea. This is what's bringing everything together for this meeting.
Mhm.
Is we wanted to move from self into society, but we find that people who are shitty make piles of shit, and this is how that it happens. By having this tether that they're unaware of, and everything they touch turns to shit.
Ourselves included.
Ourselves included.
This is shit.
Right. But yeah, that's so we need to be able to talk about the kind of pitfalls that the human psyche falls for. In other words, chasing after pleasure or avoiding pain. In other words, you're like a pinball in a machine that you're getting pushed around.
So there's
and this doesn't help us to build bigger things because it always gets ruined. They ruin everything.
Oh, so there's there's two more terms that we forgot.
What's that?
Solipsism and objectivism. So those also
The
influence
spectrum of stupidity.
So those also influence the degree of sadism and masochism that will arise. A more solipsistic tendency will take the punishment upon itself. A more objectivistic tendency will take the
Right.
punishment upon the other.
Yeah. Reminded of
Even if the other is the self.
I was reminded of Ayn Rand for some reason. The capitalist outpourings of energy.
Objectivism.
Yeah.
All right. Great time.
Then so it is. With that, we'll be right back. We should be, shouldn't we?
So let's get back to it with yet another clarification. So I just threw the words masochism and sadism out there, and I have a better way of looking at those two terms. If you recall, we started our discussion with the amoeba type singular cell organism that hits a wall, and internally has chemistry to reflect that wall and move a different way. So really, the discussion with regards to sadism and masochism is when you have like a secondary internal reflection system, like a neurological operating system that represents everything, is the propensity for that system to either focus on the external parts of the representations of the environment, which it would be the objectivism sort of descriptor, or the internal reflections of the environment, which is this solipsistic tendency. They're all basically this opposite condition, in that it's taking a certain set of reflections to be more concrete than the other.
Primacy.
And they both have the same problem, in which they diminish the importance of the other in favor of the first. It just switches onto whether it's more internal or internalized or externalized in the mechanism.
And in both cases, you have this crest-defying process.
Yeah, like again, it's the same idea behind both, and on top of it all, because it's so high level, you actually get odd combinations of solipsism and objectivism. For example, one such combination would be philosophy, which takes the solipsistic stuff and tries to objectify it as an external property. For example, the world of forms, or whatever it was called by Plato, or the plane of forms, or whatever. So stuff like that comes out with philosophical discussions. Then you have the religious discussions, which double down on the solipsistic elements without reference to the outside at all. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, you get the scientific disposition, which takes the objectivist stuff and tries to internalize as much of it as possible, and basically become a complete reductionist. And I think there's another variation of it, which I haven't really thought out yet.
Right. So these are kind of generic mental afflictions, you could say.
Yeah, that alternate as fast as they're said.
When they're in the way, as a participant, the guild just keeps getting its constraints violated by somebody who is heavily influenced in this way. They're tethered to the affect through conceit. Right?
Like they're tethered to the representations of stuff, which tethers them to different narratives, which places their self into a different context of the proximity complex that they need to be in.
Do we need some charts up in here or something? Like maybe we
have
should
all the
describe
charts.
that a bit.
It's right in the affect chart, but again, like to bring it together is going to be an exercise in of itself.
Yeah, I know. But we're trying to get at the fundamentals, the root of the self, where the self comes from, and how self gets wrapped up in something which detaches itself from the self-reference.
All right, so
why does that keep happening?
So we got to the point of describing that self-reference is a given. Then we have something called the conceit calculation, and that is a simple factor of self is less than, self is equal to, self is greater than, whatever it is it's comparing to. That alone allows self to materialize as a representation inside of a narrative of success, failure, or
because you're compared higher or lower.
Or neither, exactly.
More or less than anything, compared to whatever you want. Am I more than a peanut on the ground?
And so now whatever was self-narrative and was in a reality, in a conceited calculation, now becomes part of unreality in terms of a narrative that's ongoing, as to how whatever that self represented is going to come back into the next flow of the thought. And if that narrative is saying that the self should be somewhere specific, that somewhere specific will interfere with the idea of where somewhere is, and another conceited calculation will take place less than or greater than or neutral, and adjustments based on that narrative will continue to form, which is great. For example, if you're in a mode of survival and you need to run away from something real quick, and you need to keep that, oh shit, it's still there, oh shit, it's still there, oh god, I got away from it and I'm good.
Yep.
Like that's useful information. But when that system is hijacked to perpetually operate for everything, it loses track of what's important, and it stresses over everything.
Right, and you're never allowed to relax. Your neural OS never has rest, basically.
And not to mention that how this echoes in our society as you can't be lazy, and if you don't work, you shouldn't eat.
Even the only reason that you're sleeping is so that you can wake up tomorrow, just to continue.
And the weekend is for you to recuperate so that you can continue on Monday.
Right. So you're just preparing for what's about to happen. Enraptured in the narrative.
So 2 points to there is that there is a natural reason for the self-narrative to occur. The other point is that it should not be occurring indefinitely at all times. The other point is that it's happening indefinitely at all times, and this object of the self in the narrative is actually more of a representation of the self-reference of an ongoing process that is there or without the narrative is lost. And if it's lost, that speaks to the detached, runaway narration system. Right?
Heck yeah. Sorry, I'm just setting up the scene. Self.
So from
It's a
there,
hell of a drug.
so from there, you need another element. That's currency, which is an influence from an extrinsic narrative that allows the conceit calculation to take on a very simplified variant. I have more money, I have less money, I have
Right.
enough money. By being so easily digestible.
Now, are we already at ego here, or are we still?
Yeah. Because now you have introduced currency. Now your conceited self-narrative is bound in mere calculations of value. These calculations of value prolonged over time and in a neglect of everything else, like a smaller, narrower dimension of the self. This tethering to the currency being the conceit calculation equivalent makes the perpetual narrative much easier and run away faster. And the propensity of, not the propensity, but the explicitness of it being based on currency value is ego. And this is why all egos are the same, is because the only calculation that they're making is numerical. There's no more myth associated with the self-reference. All self-references are bound to conceit calculations that are bound to monetary or abstract currency calculations. It is a completed circle, completely
And
self-isolated
market machine
circle.
seems to depend on currency. Well, accounting for sure, but
The more-
currency that does accounting.
The more there is currency, the more there is market. Currency and market are part and parcel of the same thing, so obviously for the market to be bigger, it needs to be more currency running through the conceit calculation and at the expense of everything else. At the end, the expense of everything else is the conceit calculation allows therefore the commodity to be supplanted. right? The fact that there's a monetary value, currency value that is being at the heart of less than, equal to, or above than, means that you can change whatever it is that is being reified into that currency value, as long as it feeds that calculation towards the egoic side of pleasure, of being able to neurotically to prolong the either masochistic or sadistic
And
element.
so with the complex adaptive system view, it seems really easy to kind of shift things in and out.
Complex adaptive view gives you like the pure potentiality of the whole, and then the rest of it tells you, okay, well, with the ego sort of calculation, only these specific pathways are allowed. Everything else
and
is
it's a
temporary.
narrowing and a narrowing, and we find that with any layer, it's a narrowing of potentiality. If potentiality goes everywhere, you got the shit flying on the wheel out into space. If you constrain that back down into the whole, then and this is a way to look at ego as a kind of narrowing of reality, but things are just shitting and flying off into space.
And a narrowing in a positive feedback, which is exponential.
It's like simply the wheel spins faster and more shit comes out, but it's not feeding back to the source of where it.
Right. It's not maintaining the same. So it doesn't
the
have a
layers below.
It does not have a metastability like you would have beforehand.
Right. So this is what we really need to be able to install. In other words, a membership in the guild to move from self to society. In the book, we need to nail that down.
Well, to remove
out.
to remove the ego from the from conceit first, to remove conceit from a representation of the from being the monopoly representation of self-reference as
Now,
self.
is conceit equivalent with self then? Because I notice you just kind of mesh them up and skip.
Self comes up when the conceit calculation occurs on the self-reference and injects the self-objects into the narrative for the next phase of the moment, into the dream.
Right.
A self gets assembled from a self-reference by conceit into the moment and thrown into the dream, which reverberates back as another ontological element.
Yep.
And then that has influence on whether or not the self-calculation will reattach to it, will reject it, but it would still create another self-object and throw it back into the ether.
Seeing a bit of a discrepancy there in how with this chart the conceit.
So self is an ephemeral element that a quality of a moment. Self-reference is ubiquitous through the moment and dream and everything else. Everything is self-referential to begin with. There's no elements in your mental system that is not a representation of something else in your mental or physical system. It's all self-referential, and that's just a given. Self.
What about the God particle?
What about the goddamn particle? So self is like this ephemeral object created by the moment, thrown into the dream. Its solidarity is illusionary in that it gets recreated and recreated and recreated so often and based on a very similar theme that it feels like a solid object going from one moment to the next. So even though it's not. There is no self from this moment to the next moment.
So like when we kind of equate, it feels like equating conceit and self together there. It almost to me says that self is selfish inherently in that it's binding to these pain pleasure narratives, neutral narratives.
It's self-inventing.
As opposed to
it's self-reinventing. Hence,
but
it is selfish.
I want to separate conceit and self. Because conceit here on this chart points to some very some tethering narrative tethers here. Self, I think, doesn't
No,
have... Self can go this way, can't it? Self
No.
can feed altruism, or no?
No.
Only just nothing... No...
Because
But wait,
because
you walk...
because you okay,
You
hold
have
on.
to perceive yourself.
So hold on. Don't take the conceit calculation into as being a factor of the moment, and you'll see it. There is no self below. There is no self equal to, or there isn't. You're not concerned with the self above anything else. With that alone, you're left with a self-referential narrative, not about any selves at all, but only about what is.
Yeah.
So, is the perception of the narrative correct or incorrect? Sure, it could be one way or the other. That's the pleasure and pain perception, but there is no attachment to this narrative should be corrected. There's no this narrative should
But
be.
even from that perspective, we must utilize the self-object to do things.
Anything narrated.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So is
anything-
it bad then? Conceit, this pain, pleasure. Where is the altruism? How does altruism connect through self? I think altruism does somehow, because the self-object, because we have to tell our body to go here, go there.
Without conceit, you're here. So you have so you have so you
you're
have
talking
qualities.
about the I am inside of this object. I am a part of that object. That is object is a part of me. We're talking about proximity.
So remember, there's another element I was talking about where you have to take the narrative as empathetic and all artifacts as sympathetic.
Yeah.
This is the narrative with which you're empathetic. And one thing you'll notice about it is that it doesn't change. It doesn't shake about. There's only
Right
affect.
out of it.
There's only affect. There's only sympathy. There's only empathy. There's only affect. There's only empathy. There's only sympathy. That is the detachment
Yeah.
that is being talked
Yeah,
about,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is that altruism that is talked about, and there is no constant feeding of selves into different outlaying narratives. There's no others narratives that pop out into existence out of this.
Right.
That's the
Except for
difference.
the generic, you are a body's object, just as there are other
And
bodies
it's a
out
pure
in space.
it's pure empathy at that point, and everything else that pops up in narratives is pure
Mhm.
sympathetic.
I think I get you, and I think I understand the resistance there, so that's fine. So,
There's no attachment of self to any of the narrative. The self-reference happens. The conceit calculation does not. No identifiable self-object relieves the outflow. Now there is an outflow of narrative, but there's no attachment.
so we need to make a distinction here between when we say self-object
So when
as
the
a
narrative comes
person,
back-
like my name, my own name, Brian, me as a person, a whole, or what's the difference between that and simply understanding that you're a body in space and time, and your brain makes a calculation to move through it? Those are two self...
I was Zhenya a moment ago. But
what happened? What
No,
about
that's just the reality of it.
now?
There's a story out there that
You
I
were,
was.
and you still are.
There's a story out there that I'm still Zhenya right now, but it's a story. I'm also this collection of cells. That's another story. I'm
Mhm.
also this noise box. That's yet another story.
Yep.
And all of those are stories, but none of them really say this is a Zhenya.
There's...
The Zhenya is just like another idea,
the
another story.
The market tries to interface, and that's the ego, with something that pins you down to, this is what I am. I am this label. When I see the label used in the world, it means me, this body.
Tries to eternalize it,
Yeah.
make it eternal.
So that, I think, where the big difference is.
Yeah, and this is where you have accounting or karma versus polymorphism, which has mistakes and growth.
Pardon me. So there's a fundamentally, like, this is a super triggering realm here that in order to be a member of the guild and to be a part of what's happening.
Yeah, one of the insights has to be into
It's very
the self-lessness.
insulting to yourself, to your ego, to everything.
it's the insight into the selflessness of self, which incidentally corresponds to the no self teachings of the Buddhists.
And so that really makes us sound like, once again, religious.
Yeah.
We've been accused of being trying to start
But
a
again,
religion cult.
but the explanation here is.
But this is a religion guild. That's the difference.
Yeah. But yeah, like the idea here being is that we have a given self-reference, we have a conceit calculation, which is simply to take the outflow, which is a normal ability of calculating the outflow of one's own proximity to something else, and saying, should I be here or should I not, which is fair. But there's a big difference between believing that information and simply realizing that it occurred.
Right, and this is what it means to be human, that not to be a static DNA in your whole being, but to have a dynamism, so that you don't just die off when you're wrong, but you change, you adapt, you change. That's what it is to be human. And so many people are not humans in this earth, and so they're walking shit corpses, adding to the pile, adding to the pile of the shit pile, which has taken off, and is now spewing shit all fucking over the world.
Correct. Great analogy. So we're hammered in all the way through to ego to point out that that's the combination of that with the ontological matrix, which is an amalgamation of all self-oriented narratives out there that give rankings to different agencies, or different representations of self as agencies.
Like priority stack in the moment.
Yeah. So you combine that ontological matrix with the ego itself, and then you have the ego adopting agent-like properties from the matrix to navigate its self as in terms of conceit, to become higher and higher and higher up on the stack. Mm-hmm. And this is where ego stacking comes from.
Right, and everybody scrambles to the top by pushing others down into the flames,
into the abyss.
And it's the collective,
which is interesting.
The collective scrambling action.
Which is an interesting description, because if you think about everybody scrambling to the top to push everybody else down, it's basically got the same sentiment of the elites talking about how they are the ones that are destined for heaven, and everybody else is destined for hell.
Yeah, and I like
they're causing that.
Our like kind of pumpkin chart, or flattened out. It's like when you scramble for the top, you make this giant pillar where the fire is the bottom and the lava, people getting shoved in there through war and all that. And when everybody stops scrambling by scratching everybody else downwards, you flatten out and make a stable structure, like a community. Like
take a pillar and drop it into the water versus take a flat object and push it in the water, and it's just the same idea, same rhetoric, same rhetoric, I guess.
Yeah, neat imagery.
Or sitting on a single nail or a bed of nails.
So again, the significance can't be overstated.
But if you sit on one nail, you have a new asshole.
Oh, good. Yeah.
If you sit on many nails, you're fine. Okay, that was.
I don't want a new asshole.
Well, apparently people think we should.
But yeah, so like, just the way the world works and all that shit, like clawing above, like this is why it doesn't have to be this way, but we keep doing it because we don't know other organizational structures.
Yeah, the ability for our response is not honed into.
We don't know how to do a peer-to-peer community. Basically, we don't know how to take more re-internalize the responsibilities that we've externalized.
This came up in our conversation just today. It's kind of like the problem of, you know how you start talking to somebody and they're like, no. First of all, we have to agree on terms. We have to create an ontological ontological matrix.
We have to understand that that's what we're doing.
No, hold on. Let me finish.
Carry on.
Let me finish. Rabbi style.
Yep. So we must come to terms before we communicate.
For anybody looking for references, Religulous.
I wasn't, but continue.
Zumi might, I don't know.
All right.
So, what was I saying? Shit. Remind me what I was saying.
I would, but your questioning of what we're saying caused me to also forget. We can just start over from fresh.
Yeah, what were we talking about before that?
As if we hadn't even begun this entire live stream yet.
Yeah. Hold on. Something about the ego, stacking, flames.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Then you said something.
How it widens out to...
Yep.
And if you stop clawing over each other, instead of having this pillar where everyone dies at the bottom, you kind of create a plateau-shaped thing that you can build stability, build community.
There was a goal.
The importance can't be understated of the significance of that. Just can't. Change the way that all of society is built by changing yourself, sort of, and it's not anything that anybody can tell you.
Well, that's all the charlatanism stuff.
Yeah, the defending against charlatanism.
No. All the sound bites you just said, they're like the charlatan sound. They're like the charlatanism 101.
It's all there, man. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Well, we can just take it wherever our thoughts feel like going. Although I feel like we've significantly spoken to this whole self idea and where we wanted to go with that, and what needs to be done in order to not fuck everything up around you and create a shit pile world. It needs to be...
Yeah, so we need to just make a clarity between the fact that there are sound bites in the narrative that outflow from the moment that are in cosmological in nature and weave a cosmology.
Must be interpreted.
And then there is and the self-reference will identify there's the correct cosmology and the not correct cosmology and the okay cosmology and the not okay cosmology kind of thing. So I believe this and I don't believe that would be the self in those narratives. That's the ontological matrix.
And that helps to crust. That's what's crusting the ontological matrix is that conceit in that I like being right.
Yeah. And the second part to it is your personal narrative of I'm moving through this ontological narrative as a specific element of that cosmology, of which weaved all of the other narratives that I'm moving through. And so that's really all that's about. The point there, of course, is to say how the ego, with its needs, interacts as an individual agent through said ontology, meaning that each different agent finds itself in a different circumstance within the ontology, but all operate on the same ego principle. And so the short version of this picture is that there's that scrambling to the top that occurs as a result due to the conceit calculation aiming to maximize pleasure by being higher and minimize pain by not being lower.
Right, and it just becomes a scramble.
Yeah,
a machine-like scramble. You're just, everyone around you is the machine.
And it simplifies...
and they're all scratching you downwards, and you're like, guys, what the fuck?
And it simplifies the concept of reward and punishment, because reward and punishment, ultimately, all it has to do in this model is simply say to the conceit calculation, you're below. Or to sort of do the carrot on the stick thing is you're above, don't fuck it up. But also, but see,
check
but
your
even,
bank account.
But even the you're above has a kind of like an echo of you'd be below if you don't right? So it's not even,
Right.
so it's not even
And
a
certain
worthwhile
is
attainment.
this what appeared to be unlimited power of money doesn't actually translate into certain worlds, and you only have certain limited power, and the more you get, the more you're constrained
To those worlds.
Yeah. Oh damn. Yep, found some charts there. It's good stuff. Good stuff. One which
that's
is
the one I had in mind. Yeah.
has written all over it. That was the
This one,
the pumpkin
that
chart.
one, yeah.
Now this was the like the ego stacking, reward, punishment, and then we had the flat kind of pumpkin chart with some responsive fuck that from the system. The system says that.
Oh, you're saying the system does not
Yeah.
like the pumpkin.
No, the system doesn't like the pumpkin at all. That was a systemic
Where you can be
systemic
rewarded and
comment.
punishment by nature instead of somebody.
The system is very upset about this chart. But yeah, we had the matrix. The matrix. That would be better.
Whoopsie doopsie.
I hadn't bothered reading anything yet. I was just admiring the symmetry.
And we've got some pumpkin-like stuff going on over here, but more like hourglass, actually. Converging on the matrix.
Sort of, yeah, but that's a style. Right, so obfuscated with sound bites and then model with hold-ons. Interesting.
Well, it's this. Okay, to explain this a little bit better with imagery, for you at least, I hope, is when you look at this side, it's like all over the place. It's fragmented and it's all over the place, and it's just fragmented. And
right.
But
as
here,
as a way to run your mind, yes.
but here,
I understand.
you only ever circle around this one.
The same thing.
The same thing over and over. So it's always hold on.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah,
really conceptually what that's
it.
about.
So you're, in other words, this is all content. This whole side here is content that keeps kind of just bubbling and arising and whatever.
And changing.
But you're understanding it from the outside as the same thing that just keeps happening over and over again.
Yeah. Whereas the other side is content, but also reflective of the structure, which does not change because that's the structure responsible for the content. And because of that, it just becomes the same content, different flavors of the same content, but the same content. It doesn't shift around. Not in the same sense, like that doesn't have a forward point like a narrative.
Right. Like to keep slotting you into something over and over again, reifying itself.
Yeah, progress in this case does not amount to newer and newer things, but more like refinement and refinement and refinement.
And so I have a question then about this. This whole thing is a divergence from the self-reference through self-conceit, ego, and all that. So how do we pass upwards knowledge of the self-reference into the layers and languages above that are utilizing that? How do we carry on this humanity? How do we build humanity into our social structures?
So
what are the constraints on that? Like we need
it's
the side channel,
It's a
right?
two-sided question. It's a double-sided sword of a question.
We've described it as a side channel.
Because this work, what we're aiming towards, aims at at the context at which had already been conceded through and through up until this point, and we are reintroducing an idea that might say, hey, hold on. There is a stage at which, this whole chart works together because this side of it flares up and dies down.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when it flares up and dies down, it's held back by natural concerns because there's not enough tech to sustain oneself, to not die from being too stuck in bizarro land. If you keep running from a line, you're gonna run off a cliff eventually.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of stupid analogy. It is a stupid analogy, but that's the idea. Like, eventually you'll exhaust yourself, eventually you'll run. You can't. And this is what we're doing to ourselves now. We're running through all full on all the time, and we use sleep as like as a side note to do while we run, as opposed to running being a side
Like,
note.
it's nice
for,
if
for
you
rest.
can afford a vacation, quote unquote, which kind of like forces you into a mode like your whole environment changes.
But then you're
needs
forced to consume.
switch.
Then you're
Well, I mean, but that's how you give
can't
your
take a
rest. Rest is commodified.
right.
You're not.
So your
Yeah.
rest is actually on the slave labor of the backs of others.
Of course, of course.
There can be no actual rest for everybody.
So, my question was then again, what is ensuring that the side channel, as I've described it, gets carried on up the layers? The side channel is what allows the self-reference to be communicated. That's a defining of the side channel right here.
So hold on, I want to answer your question about humanity first. Because we are already conditioned to live here and almost exclusively, right? Our familiarity with this side of the equation does not get lost in the moving on to the altruistic side of affect. We simply gain insight into what it is. And so our humanity isn't lost by that process because we are intimately familiar with it. So we're not talking about the loss of humanity there.
I see, yeah.
Predating civilization, this is not a problem
And
because the natural concern would have a selective pressure on this only ever being a flare-up. And the only reason it could surpass that is through technological advancement that delayed consequence.
Okay, so how to keep the humanity archetype alive, though? Maybe that's a way to describe it, because we're layers beyond that, and we want.
First of all, where's the assumption that it's not going to be alive? Like let's unpack
The assumption
the question.
is that when we crystallize our behavior, we are allowing things to die, and that's the way we're Darwinianizing ourselves by crusting to certain structures.
This is just rebirth. This is a case of rebirth. This is the material is all there, right? It's just been scrambled, and the pattern can take hold again because
Agreed.
it's all there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, not that the thing that's being represented isn't there, but that the representation basically doesn't exist properly right now for what.
Right, but we have all the pieces to reassemble said representation properly.
Yeah. I think that's what the model is about. That's exactly it right there. And so this is what this side channel is all about, and how to carry that self-reference up through the other structures.
And interesting, you should say side channel. It's again to this diagram. This is this is funny, because if we take this to be the main channel,
the side channel.
This becomes the side channel.
The side channel, yes.
Which according to the marketing,
That's good.
According to the marketing machine, reifies itself here. But this is the problem right there. There's still that connection. Because when you do an altruistic act through the side channel, there is still a window for the system to recuperate that.
Sure.
Because the conceit in this calculation will take that I was altruistic. I was more altruistic than you.
Yeah.
For example, this is the crude, of course, very crude.
Typical.
But this is the danger with just thinking about this in terms of abstractions. Even in this abstraction, even if you had an altruistic moment, a true altruistic moment in which you felt like the Buddha or whatever, the next moment isn't guaranteed.
Right.
it's only through a complete cycle of complete insight that the circle can be completed, because you will always be aware of the other side of it. And again, the only time it's necessary to become aware of it is when it starts to when there is a impact of delay on the consequence, because that delay causes a window of neglect to formulate, of not making that insight, which allows a window for other narratives to take hold.
The snowball effect. Yep, the breakaway, the Great Schism, the breakaway civilization. This all depends on this basic thing of something becoming for its own self through this tether.
And we have stepped another step further than the human animal onto this representation, is that we've taken representation and also imparted it on the world itself and have it now reading back to us. Right? So that window of neglect that I was talking about, combined with externalization to the point of where we allow other narratives from the outside to now speak to us that we haven't written out, we haven't spoken out, we haven't that exist between ages.
Right.
It
Right,
creates
like
a complete clusterfuck.
we need a build up of meaning internally, and that's the type of sound bites we're hearing externally match up with that.
Yeah.
To de-externalize.
So, have we left any stone unturned that we don't want? We want?
Plenty. I think it might be almost time for a break, though.
Mhm.
Quick break again.
Mhm.
Gotta crack another brew.
Yep.
Mhm. Yep. So where should we carry on from here? Like, I love that we brought up the side channel and like how to carry this self-reference. That's what I want in that guild dynamics section when you're talking about self-reference, something to practice or meditate on that gives you to see the tether. It's focus. Is that what you're talking about? That's going to focus is going to deal with it. How do you deal with that in the next section?
So participant, right, is the kind of a coherence that states there's something good here. I
Right.
don't know what that is.
So testing in faith. Okay, now you're going to describe the whole thing that leads to the aha moment, starting with faith. Correct. Yep. So that implies a master or a guide, or even the
Tangible
inner
or
guide.
tangible or intangible, yeah.
All right, something leads you towards that.
So this is where it becomes important, is that once you start to think in terms of the self as being this ephemeral object that constantly reappears and reappears and reappears and reappears, the final insight into membership is that the self object reappears for everybody. That's the narrative. That's why you're a member of that same narrative. This is the membership itself, the membership in that narrative.
Self-object
the insight.
reappears for everybody. What do you mean reappearing?
So, I think about myself. I'm a participant. How is this good for me? All of that stuff.
Mhm.
And then I'm fed this artificial narrative of self-reference and conceit, building up a self and
Mhm.
spewing it back out into
Right.
the narrative.
Just the basic model of what we've talked about here.
And my
today.
my participation is in terms of, well, this is good. I like this. This is good for me. This is me. I am above something because of this. And all of a sudden, hopefully, you start seeing this
Like
is
you
that
see
narrative.
you see yourself as bigger, above others because you learn this.
So now you start seeing an example of your own conceit in a positive light of this participation itself.
Imagine that, eh?
Right?
We're so much better than
And so
I'm
this-
better than you even.
And so this is exposing the conceit calculation over and over and over, as long as you keep thinking that way. And the final insight into this whole thing, that this is the only thing that happens to everybody at all times. And that movement away from the specifics, right? Like, this is good
Yeah,
for
yeah.
me.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
oh, this is happening to everybody.
So
This is the entryway into a membership of the narrative of the self, in which the self is now taken to be a result of a conceded calculation. So you're still attached to the narrative as a member. There's no detachment per se, but a detachment is now seen.
right,
And
and
the-
that's like it opens up a whole Pandora's box.
And when the detachment is realized and then is incited in its full totality, self from narrative disappears, mastery is achieved, and action, altruistic action, is now taken in the form of allowing the participant to be empathetically participate in the narrative and make that same connection. Because the meaning of self becomes ephemeral, and then also part of dream. Once it's fully part of dream, there is no actual self to take
Right.
seriously.
And from that perspective, it becomes maybe much more natural to speak and communicate with people.
Yeah, you can recognize selves in narratives.
Like you stop having
But there is
that
no narrative of
confrontational
self.
ego type of challenge.
Mhm.
That there's some ego to damage or whatever.
Right, because the ego relies on the self object, but you're not taking the self object as a solid. You're speaking to a self here, to a self there, in that moment, to a self there, in this moment, and it's completely fragmentary. And it's, and mastery
The
is
awareness.
to,
It's of a model.
yeah.
Awareness of a good model.
Mastery of the self in this case is mastering where in narrative self appears and dealing with that on altruistic terms rather than on the narratological terms.
Because self keeps coming up, the environment keeps, oh hey, Brian,
And it's the same.
Zhenya, I
and-
point my finger at you.
And this is why it comes back to this as being the only narrative with which there is empathy with, because that's that narrative. Right? You see the selves appearing in the attachments.
Which narrative? Did you point to some?
So when we talk about empathy towards the narrative, it's this stable altruistic narrative that keeps taking different
Yeah.
colors.
That's what empathize
on
with that other people have that process
that
going
ephemeral self, right?
on.
And then mastery would be to recognize where the ephemeral self appears in those narratives and related back to this through the altruistic narrative, so that
Right.
it always comes out back as the altruistic narrative, no matter what is tackled.
Bam.
Blah.
We need some Emerald Live. Bam.
I felt that.
Bam. Yeah.
Break?
With that, we'll take a break for sure, Bird.
the
to
self.
where we are.
We were just at the self. So if you want to go that far with this stuff, let's try. But
Yeah, well, I don't know if we can.
we have to go with the whole spectrum of neurosis and.
Yep, and
psychosis
so we are
first.
back, and of course we had a lot going on there before the break, and planned to talk about neurosis and psychosis. I think we gotta.
Well, I can tie it
We
up.
gotta just at least review and go over that.
I can tie it in.
But I just wanted to say we want to get into some ideas I had about guild dynamics and using specific instances of guilds and guild technology to speak more to the society section, which we're kind of going towards. Like, you need a shared media to build groups of people together and all this technology.
One thing that
I want to get into that, but we need
Yeah.
to wrap up where we just
One
were
thing
with
that
the
came out
self.
of our little discussion right now is that most of that falls under one specific natural guild we call the economy guild that underlies a lot of the structure of the answers that are going to be given on that front, on the concrete side. But yeah, before we get into all of that, let's build up a little bit more because we haven't done enough of that already.
Economy guild.
And we want to take this discussion a little bit from where the self comes from and how ego is built up to what it makes it so important to focus on this self, ephemeral self, as a construct in one's initial stages of the journey, and to ensure a more appropriate reification.
Understanding
For
the
it
self.
is the flip side of when that doesn't happen, and the outpour of
Things go bad.
what we were talking about, like a
What
shit
has been
flinging.
dubbed shit.
Yeah. So basically, the flip side of it being hijacked
Flinging shit.
into
This is
us.
like the final boss of Portal Mountain. It's just a ball of shit. A pile of shit just flinging. It flings it everywhere. But you have to defeat it somehow.
Ian, if you're listening, that's what's in the game.
You must defeat it. It's your last quest. Enter the inner chamber.
Oh God. Oh shit.
The inner chamber is guarded by a literal ball of flying shit.
Okay. So aside from the shit analogy, let's just
Right,
build
continue
up
on.
a
Continue
little
on.
bit. In the case where the self is reified through narrative over and over and over and is built up upon, as opposed to seen as something that is
Like kind of crystallizing,
that is-
like a crystal building,
Yeah.
too. That's an interesting analogy.
Yeah, and it's funny because our ability to recall the past is not very trustworthy. So the way it gets built up is that the foundation gets changed as layers get added on at the same time. So it's
Does
still a
happen.
shifting object. It just has a kind of a sense of solidarity to it. Now
Solidity.
to it. Now the issue is how that solidity is maintained to begin with, which we dubbed as neurosis and psychosis
Right.
after the fact, but both of which feed into
Specifically,
each other.
Yeah, I don't know. Depends. It's like a chicken and egg problem.
Right. So in the neurosis category of explanation, this is the commodities supplied by the narrative of the market machine that allow the reification of pleasure and pain in terms of sadism and masochism, and basically the transformation of the pain responses into pleasure responses, and a continuation of reinforcement in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
So with neurosis established, the psychosis builds up in terms of being attached to specific narratives as being more real than others, and further into accepting of a narrative one gets slotted into, the more we can say there's psychosis is involved with that. So again, this will all depend on the nature of the narrative
And
and
there's
itself.
the psychosis is linked closely with ideology. It seems like just
Right.
worldviews and all
A
that.
particular reification
then-
that certain things are represented in
So-
one way or not, but not in another.
So the binding process, part of the binding process is like, it feels so good to be right, and it feels so good to be right about all your history. So being right about everything that you've always been right about all your life just feels really freaking good. That's the
Right.
neurotic attachment to that you don't want to change, even though there's evidence to like question this and that structure, right? Maybe present it to you, so you can present to somebody and say like, is that really the way like the world works?
So neurosis is a pleasure response to the psychosis, and the psychosis provides the basis for pleasure responses in the neurosis for further psychosis, and in that way they feed onto each other
Breakaway, yeah.
into amalgamation
That's like
of
an
themselves.
affect breakaway. That's even without describing specifics.
So, with that idea in mind, we move on to a number of problems that this presents to any further development towards the social system. Because the individual system is so wrapped up in its own self-inflicted and afflicted narrative.
That's
that
what
the
emerges
outpour-
outwards.
That the outpour is a self-inflicted and outflicted society, which
Society which pulls your levers and
which
pushes your
inflicts pain
buttons.
upon itself and inflicts damage upon the environment and anything outside of itself.
Right, most of which can't even respond to it possibly.
And so the long runabout answer as to why us working on the self and self-responsibility comes prior to social responsibility is because without the quenching of the neurotic and psychotic responses flowing out into the society from the self, the society cannot represent things outside of neurosis and psychosis and the masochistic and sadistic
Emergent.
responses as commodities to move ahead and inflict further.
The emergence principle of complex adaptive systems.
Not inflict and further calculate conceit into further and further state of exploitation, really.
You get more and more attached and crusted.
At the expense of everything else, yes.
And so that's what gets expanded outwards to the society. Emergent.
And the idea of the tethered is that the idea is that everybody's getting like a fish hook presented to them and tugged along the same egoic path towards this self-neglect and other neglect and complete neglect at the expense of continuing a narrative that has nothing to do with anything, really.
The fishhook is like at the very top of the pillar to escape, and you're scratching everything downwards.
To ease the pain.
Yeah. There's a pleasure and a pain.
Yeah. Climb up, relieve
Avoid.
the climb up relieves the tension.
Pain. There's like a... So this pillar, at the bottom is pain, pure pain, in destruction. At the top is pure pleasure and...
Pure pleasure masking incredible pain, because that pleasure comes at the cost of... You can only stay up here if you suppress and process pain downwards. So you get your share of the pain, but in a masochistic sense, you just shit rolls downhill.
Right, and like how everybody kind of feels the zeitgeist here going on. Doesn't matter what part of the stack you're at.
And you just try to
We all
offload it.
feel it.
But you try to offload it. We try to offload it.
Bam. Chef Emerald. Yep. So that's cool. So we're wrapping up, I guess, this section here.
Well,
neurotic
no,
and psychotic.
We haven't. We have.
I'm glad we've introduced those now, because those were recent topics this last week. We've just been talking about properly pinning and appropriating neurotic and psychotic.
With sadism and masochism gaining a more specific role within the tether, as the mechanism of the tether being the commodified commodified avenues of release of pain and a transformation of the pain by the zeitgeist
sounds wicked.
into temporary pleasures that allow us to avert our attention for long
Right.
enough so that we're tricked into having the pleasure being as a quality of that moment or that or the other.
It sounds wicked. Now, is this the proper foundation for society?
To be completely
Just trying to outleash your pain on other things and destroy everything. Is this the way to build society?
well, it wouldn't be a zeitgeist if nobody felt this was wrong. Everybody knows inside, deep down inside, that it's all very fucking wrong. And it's that very quality that the word is supposed to capture.
Right. Right.
It's not
right.
supposed to
And all
rest-
from our own perspective.
It's not
too.
supposed to rest on some kind of logical conclusion. It's a
Through
quality.
our own soul, we feel it.
The soul in this case is just a
Our own
representation
unique
of
soul.
It's just a representation of the zeitgeist from one particular experiential perspective.
So, what else do we have left here on this whole self arc? Affect, we've got the market commodification of the market machine through affect. We just kind of did that loop there. The sadomasochistic commodities. You know,
Acting
getting
as,
what you need off the market by expelling
Yeah.
pain on others.
So the reason it's all hinged on pain is because there's the market machine is neglectful, and so it's not supplying for any qualitative needs. It's supplying for quantitative needs. So there is always
Exactly,
So there's
yeah.
always an input of pain involved.
Being
That
a
is
product of the ego.
through the dysmorphism of the incoming market narrative. To supplant that pain, it has variations of masking it into pleasure. One of them is you accept it upon the self in the solipsistic sense, and then it's your conscience, and this is your fault,
Right.
and pleasure is derived from harder work. Or
The
externally, the sadist will exert more control and authority and so on and so forth to fix whatever pains caused by the system into a more as an opportunity to
It's like balancing the universe.
right. So God complex.
Fucked. Well, it's all like crazy shit, and this is what we're describing. So we're saying, like, if you got all this crazy shit going on, which we all do, you got to be aware of it before you start.
And then
building,
imagine thinking
before you
about
start
this-
having a society.
Now imagine thinking about this not in such extremes, but as a tit-for-tat blended existence in which you do this to yourself, let alone to other people.
Right. Yeah. And I
Minute by minute, even.
as tough as it is, I always think about like forgiveness as being like you can't.
Well, there's
you
a
can't
case
judge
for it.
people.
There's a case for it in the way that we're talking about it, and it's it's all encompassed in staying in this side of the narrative. If this is the narrative, then what everybody is going through is absolutely, categorically, has to be on the forgiven side. It's not their fault.
Yeah. Right.
It's nobody's fault. It's responsibility, but not fault. And that is a tough cookie to digest. How is it my responsibility if I didn't do anything? But again,
Right,
and this is why I love the way you framed it. Is like it's not like your task or duty, but it's your ability to respond, and that is your ability to respond to the psychosis, to the neurosis, through adjusting the narrative under which they are being fed through.
Yep. And how else do you learn that? How do we learn that? Education.
Well, after being educated by the system, that's the only way to learn that.
Right.
because the system has removed any other capacity for learning. The system feels successful, if it can feel. The system is successful when it makes it impossible for you to trust your own capacity for learning. It only trusts you to be knowledgeable in anything when it certifies you in its own mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this reminds me of our earlier discussion about the table of contents and what's kind of needed for what. Interesting.
All right.
Very interesting. Yeah, so anyways, do we want to move on to, have we wrapped up? What do you think? I think we've created a pretty good signal structure from self-reference down out to ego.
To get to your economy guild, I think we just need to start off with the ontological matrix as we have built it.
Mm-hmm.
And start exposing the type of activity within the self that allows for membership to emerge.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's the next section.
Which is the areas of concern.
Mm-hmm.
And if you'll notice, what they don't do is they don't disrupt the ontological matrix in any capacity. They are taken onto it's something that the agent and the ego is latching onto, and through it kind of becomes holonic. We're
assuming the existing structure, which is crazy and all that, but yes, we can pull it all in and actually use it to accelerate the guild itself through this high-tech environment that we've been presented with.
In other words, that no matter how much the system fights it, the guild will arise. Mm-hmm. Or can arise, because all of the components that are necessary for it are cannot be eliminated by it.
Right. Because that which does eliminates the entire stack.
Yeah. So it's kind of a conundrum
for the system.
I'm saying the system is in a conundrum.
Because it will hit that limit point where it can't go any further, and it realizes that it itself is in an existential crisis in which it needs that self-reference back, in which the side channel must come back, be reintroduced.
Well, it's either that or extinction.
Exactly.
And that's the point of, what do you call it, the apocalypse and the Armageddon. As we have appropriated
to leave
down,
nothing left except
point.
For that.
With apocalypse being the revelation that it's necessary, and Armageddon being the destruction that occurs if it's not if that information is not yielded to.
Right. And it's only yielded to certain degrees here and there.
Well, it's a survival response, and sometimes when you respond for survival,
it's
too late.
But we need early signals to just shock people, I guess, on a scale. Like, I'm not in control of mass media narratives or anything, but higher level shocks need to come to people.
It's what Vicky was saying with regards to teaching children about, like, the monsters underneath the ice. It's not because there are monsters underneath the ice, but because children will respond more directly to real, actual narratives.
Something that's there. I look down and it's down there.
Yeah.
It's not just purely mental, disconnected from the senses.
And then when you show them examples of said monsters in the ice, of like taking down rocks or something through the ice, or taking an animal through the ice. They learn not to step on the thin ice.
It's like
just because
artificial
there's
synchronicity.
Exactly, and the reality of the story does not matter to the child. And when they grow up, they know it's not a real monsters, and at the same time, they know it is, because for that
mythological uncertainty,
for that structure of living, it works.
We need to uncertainty is another word for the side channel. I think.
Yes. The allergy of the system. Uncertainty.
Bam! Chef Emerald. I doubt that such a better burrito could be constructed. Maybe Chef Emerald could match this, what they do around here. But we have discovered the divine.
Mm-hmm. I sometimes cheat and have it in the middle of the week.
Oh yeah. Ooh, wow. Just gonna pause it for a sec. Because it's rude. Da-da-da-dum.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I wanted to kind of transition from this point into speaking a little bit about my experience I've had over the last couple weeks in meditation and practice of trying to organize a guild, if you will. Organize a guild.
Herding cats.
And it's good, yeah, cats are hard to herd in general, but it's always good to have like concrete scenarios where you try to do something with the technology. So over the last couple weeks I've been just kind of talking it up with people, you know, like the idea about having this basically it's like a shop incident log kind of thing where just within your guild, if somebody sees something wrong and they got a problem with it, you know, like, because this is how constraints get identified. The problem, there's a book that you can go to write in. Now I was thinking like, probably process protocol would be that you talk to somebody and say, does this make sense to you? Because I'm gonna write a report. I'm gonna write an incident number entry log. Right, I'm just going to write it there, and then you would have a deck of index cards, which is like your database, which you can go through. Every card you probably have it numbered 1 through X, whatever. Just keep adding numbers, right? And different colors could be for different things. But the idea is that this guild or a shop, any guild, would have a central log. That's you go to the latest one, and it's practically today's date. So log, things happening through time. And then you'll also have those logs always pointing out to a card entry, to an index card. It could be representing the type of problem that it is. Like, for example, somebody like in a shop screwed up an edge or something, right? So, or screwed up taking measurements, didn't take measurements properly. So this becomes like an incident type. The logbook points to incident types. From those incidents, there can be like talk and conversation about what protocols need to be created. Okay, your edge is getting fucked up, okay. So then you have a condition and or an event and action pair, and these are the protocol pairs, right, of what to do in this case. The proper flow of action to do in this guild to not break the constraint. And then you build up this pile of protocols basically through this logbook, and you can see the history of how this guild has progressed, what it's become.
I think I hear what you're saying, and what you're saying is that this incident
shared media. We need shared media.
A log here represents an act taken that inadvertently broke a constraint, despite the fact that it was in demand, and it was an attempt at supplying.
Right.
However, a constraint was broken.
Right.
How do we deal with?
So this is demand supply feedback loop. That's what you're
the meta
getting at.
schedule.
Correct. Yeah.
So this is the post.
Meta schedule. You'll have to expand on that a bit, but yeah, I'm talking about having a central place, shared media for the guild, for a group of people who are purporting to share a certain cosmology about a certain space and work together to do things through a shared language on that media, the media of the environment. And that's a generic description of a guild. That's what you want to do. So we need shared media to represent this happening, even though everybody should have their own database. I'll totally like acknowledge that. Everyone should have their own deck and book, but people don't do that. So this is kind of like a stopgap measure, as you can see, where I am the one managing this this particular deck and book. Right, just to get something going, and speaking towards like the AO and Anders and all that kind of stuff, each software-wise to represent this, we would each have a copy of this logbook and deck structure, but we will only typically each have a subset of those cards, because just because somebody says this is the right way to do it doesn't mean that I keep that in my deck and I'm doing it that way, right? So this is like kind of bringing up the dashboard idea, that you have your own live representation of me and my body and my environment from my perspective, right? Not just one shared book and a deck. That doesn't cut it, right? Everyone must have their own, and that's their own responsibility. But software-wise, yes, you can do that. In this type of a scenario, I'm just trying to get together what it takes to have this kind of shared. I am representing the shared emergent.
So it's a process.
Deck, right? I'm pretending that this is what is emergent.
You're saying that after the fact, once rubber hits the fan, or rubber hits the road kind of thing, shit hits the fan, actions are taking place, there's an inadvertent reality that we have to deal with, in that no matter how perfect we think we're going to go about something, we're going to break one of our own constraints, because we can't account for absolutely everything, and
and we're only going to have our own perspective.
Yeah.
Our own unique perspective.
So what you're saying is that constraint breaking requires a more concrete approach in recording.
For sure. That to build up what the guild is, you need to keep track of,
and I think this qualifies,
what it is not.
And I think this qualifies as a part of the record of commitment, because if the record of commitment is supposed to say, once
like
this is done, what was it that was done? And one of those things that can be done,
you keep looking back at what was done.
Oh, we found out that we've broken this, and this constraint. Therefore, what needs to be done is a reiteration of these demands without the breaking of this, and this constraint.
Right.
So it's still within the same realm. So the record of commitment could be this log.
What comes out of this is a refinement process for protocols.
Yeah. So a log is a part and parcel with the actual outcomes. So it's the meta outcomes of the meta schedule.
Meta outcomes.
Of the meta schedule.
Does that even exist?
It will now.
It does now. Yep. Bam.
Oh, man, that was a good burrito. Too bad it's gone.
Yep. Too bad. And we have about half an hour left in this little session. But yeah, it's kind of nice to take it towards a more practical step, and this is like, I'm just trying to give a little hint about what I'm hoping to bring up in the next sessions about society. Shared media, like this book. I can hold it up. I don't have any cards, but like this is just paper stapled together. Right?
This book is so important.
It's paper stapled together.
But it's just a logbook.
And there's also index cards which fit into a deck format. And so I think that the sheer amount of protocols that you'll end up having, and even like talk pages for protocols. Like I was thinking like red could be like talk pages, discussions about protocols. But anyways, in the card system, then this is a very kind of like interesting, interesting
it's
schema.
the software schema all over again of the dashboard. It's just trying to adapt it to a different medium.
Yeah.
I think the more important elements is not the cards, the index cards, or the logbook, so much as it is the modes of operation that underlie all of these things.
Correct.
One of this
Okay,
is
so-
simply conversation.
so the
the
mode
other one is broadcast.
In this,
and so on.
this I want broadcast on the book. That's what the log format, one after another. And then, within the deck, I want to use the abstract mode of operation,
Yep.
right?
Schemas.
And I think the deck format of media is congruent with a database, like just so many
Yeah.
little tiny pieces, right?
Yep. Indexed.
And the way I envisioned it was that programs would be just reference on cards too, just as sub card. Just even if you wanted to talk about that specifically.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know if it makes sense to go beyond modes of operation because there's so many different ways to implement. There's so many different ways to implement conversation and broadcast and
right.
that
Exactly.
I don't know if it makes sense to like stick to a single format.
And
I
this,
mean, sure, as an example, cool. But
Yes,
but
just
to give,
as an
but to
example.
give it the presentation of okay, this is how you do it,
That's
and
how you
people
do it.
people look at it the example as the
okay, this is the
tangible thing.
charlatan problem.
Yeah, that's where I'm having an issue.
Which that gives me an issue too. This is my attempt, test, prototype at something that might capture the processes of a guild together, with people together, flocking behavior. Those are the constraints. I think this can do it. I need a log so that people can look back into history and see, oh, this happened how many times? It just keeps fucking happening. Look, I turn the page back, it's there, it's there.
Yeah, and there's no way that it's not the record of
You
commitment.
need what I want here is to artifacts, media that you use in vocal meeting to communicate with people. So you got a logbook of things happening. You got a deck with numbered cards. You can write the number in it. Refer to any number. In each entry, you can refer to different numbers of things. Right?
Yeah.
And you've got different functions.
This is obviously far more suited for a computer than it is for an actual index card. Especially when you have
I know.
numbers referencing numbers
I know.
referencing numbers.
I know. But this is the constraint, is that I believe this has to be able to be done in index card format with people.
You should be able to do the most contrived version of it mentally.
With mentally and I was going to say vocally even, but not even that, of course.
But yeah, internally
Of
and
course.
mentally.
And this is something I know we've both understood this for a long time.
So why not give the abstract points of view of modes of operation instead, and just focus on you got to be able to either speak it out or
Right.
in conversation, or you got to be able to
And
broadcast it out, or
this
you
is
got
what
to be able
I
to,
talked
to
about
formulate
magic.
it in a formula, or you got to be able to enact it in some kind of
Did we
dance.
appropriate magic and sorcery?
No.
Because
Magic, yes.
I thought that we might have, but I wanted to think about it in terms of ability to describe reality, and like we hyperstitionally weave.
Magic, would be directed, willful manipulation of synchronicity. So the way you flow your words out.
Now by
that
willful,
willful, you are willful in what you're speaking, and you're manipulating the resonance wake in such a way that
this is already implying self plus, isn't it?
it's implying charlatanism.
But magic doesn't always have to be like that.
Doesn't have
I
to
was
be.
just thinking that
we
the-
are also in the same boat of charlatanism because we are enacting the
Hold
same
on.
thing through sound bites.
I was thinking that magic could be related to the skill or ability of describing reality itself in proper, like, holonic form.
No, no. It's an
What is
impart.
that?
It's an impart.
Hyperstation.
It's an impart. Can you pass me that mouse? This. I affected my environment. This is magic. I willfully got the mouse through your body. It's a shitty explanation, I know. What I'm saying is that magic is very, very, very tame.
But
tame.
what's the skill dependent on, though? The ability to describe reality. You said that's a mouse. I understood that that's a mouse.
The ability to resonate a specific way that manipulates
Yeah,
your
so I
surroundings.
think you proved the point, actually.
So I don't know if I did. What I'm saying
Magic
is that
has the ability to describe reality and to.
it's not a
download.
description of reality.
Well,
It's
I know
the
that
ability
will has always been built
It's the
into
ability
that.
to
So there's something-
resonate into
It's
the
the narratives.
ether.
It has to do with the narratives you're creating.
So I have a plan in my head. I wanted that mouse. I wanted to affect reality outside of myself, so I sent out a message into it.
Right, resonating.
It reverberated back
The
with your
skill of
action.
resonation as magic.
The ability to manipulate your body through voice.
Now,
For example,
here's what I wanted to get to. That
even though you were, it utilizes pre-built mechanisms through and through. For example, our knowledge of the same language, the mirror neurons that we share in terms of experience, and all of these little layers play a huge effect on it. But the bigger point is that the narrative portion of "Give me that mouse"
and
was
maybe
sent
that's
out into the ether.
maybe that's what's meant
resonated
by
through the medium of sound.
that's
and
what's
then
meant
revert
by
back with actual action.
manipulation of will is meant because you are dealing in narratives
So,
that encompass the self object.
if you're skillful in being in synchronicity,
So like magic casting
your-
spells and all this shit.
your capacity for magic is increased. However, this does not make you a good person in any way, right? Because it just makes you manipulative.
Can, yeah.
Well, no, that's the first step for it. The other one is what you use that manipulation for, and if it's to not manipulate, then it's a little bit more
So
progressed.
it seems magic is born after this self idea or the conceit.
It's also built into our everyday activity. It's built into our.
Well, I
way.
wanted to point out I don't know if this is, I always use the word dichotomy wrong, but self and social, as is magic and sorcery. That's how I had seen the relation, and I realized that it kind of lined up as sorcery and manipulation of
sorcery
others.
would be like a systemic system.
But it's for the purpose of manipulation of the other will, not you just your own.
It's the difference
Do you
between
see
taking.
the stacking and emergence here?
It's the difference between taking a single soundbite and the myth from which it comes from. Magic is a single spell. Sorcery is the collective term for spelling.
Yeah, I don't know how
doing spells.
useful that is, though.
It isn't.
In the
That's
way
why we don't talk about it.
So, but what we need to, when we are appropriating, we have to make sure that we line it up. So, sorcery
I only answered the question of whether we appropriate it or not. I didn't say how useful it is.
I
for
want to
our discussion.
appropriate sorcery as well in an extension of magic.
Soul and zeitgeist.
Yeah.
The soul is the singular experience of the zeitgeist. Magic is the
Yeah, okay,
singular
you're right.
experience
Yeah.
of the sorcery.
Yeah, that's what
Sorcery is the all-encompassing.
That's the horizon I want to jump over with this, with our appropriation of magic and sorcery. Something like that. Just ideas.
And with that, break.
Indeed, I'll take my mouse back. Bubbles.
harmonious hypernarratives.
Inside an obfuscated meta-narrative.
Right, like bubbles of coherence.
Yeah.
Then you can say that within those
Bubbles.
bubbles there exists a synchronicity.
Mm-hmm.
With the ability or the capacity to direct
Synchronicity.
what
Sounds
the
like mystery to me.
So if you have a pocket of the synchronicity, if there's somebody directing it willfully, aka recognizing the hyper narrative,
Say a guide, for example.
and kind of takes the picture and takes the whole thing into account, then you have somebody who is exerting magic, because they're playing. It's because they're play. If the synchronicity itself or harmony itself is like an instrument, they're playing on the keys of it,
Mm-hmm.
surfing the wave, if you will. So if you want to talk about what magic is in correlation to resonance wakes, where synchronicity is incidental.
It's got to be a skill of mastery or a
Well, yes,
membership.
synchronicity is
of
generally
mastery.
incidental and personal, but if you have somebody who's paying attention in that small little bubble of it that it's
Mhm.
happening in, and then is directing it a specific way, that is an exercise of magic.
Cool. I'm sure it will come up again.
Between you
As
and I,
well.
so that we have a solid definition of what the fuck we're talking about, magic is not something that's really grand or crazy. It's simply just a matter of being in the moment and directing that moment a little bit more than other would. So being awake inside of a dream where everybody else is asleep.
The skill requires access to a much more potential than is normal.
Is to be able to see the higher layer on playing out, through which
Mhm,
synchronicity
mhm.
is appearing.
Yep.
So
yep.
an overarching theme to a moment.
So this whole idea of
Or profiling for the atheist.
moving the book from towards society and
So-
having these certain technologies like
So
the deck protocol.
So
And
to
all
move
that.
the book towards society, we
We
have
need
to
shared
address
media.
We have to
Guild needs shared media.
we have shared media, but if we pour shit onto our shared media,
Yeah, it's
we're going to get
Oh my god.
piles.
So almost
Of-
like only members should have quote unquote have access to shared media piles, whatever you call them.
Well, that's not a goal we can stand
No,
by.
that's not doesn't sound right. But only those members will be able to likely create coherent cards.
No, what this yes, but what I was getting at here is that to get from self to society, the few problems that I've mentioned have to actually be addressed so that the outflow of shit doesn't go into it. So the first thing towards the social is the work on the self, and the work on the self involves stepping away from and detaching oneself from the sadistic and masochistic commodities. That's where the discussion begins of self moving towards society,
Hmm.
or from membership
I
to
wonder
mastery.
if
in another
many or
sense.
most people would identify with sadism or masochism
And not until
without
we,
getting super triggered.
not
and just
until
ignoring you.
not unless we qualify it really well in the book.
Yeah,
But it's been done before, and we can do it again.
sure.
For our purposes, for your thinking, it's they're both commodities supplied by the market to transform the pain supplied by the market as the ubiquitous pain
And
that's supplied by the market
uh,
as a
outlet.
reification of pleasure.
Some kind of outlet.
To transform pain into pleasure through a transaction. which is the
Right.
conceit.
And so we wanted to go through like I don't know why you want 12 different attributes that are fucked up of people.
Oh no,
that,
12 is because 12 is what we would tend to land on.
That yeah, all the behaviors that remove us from being human.
Yeah. The only reason
We need humans for the guild. That's what
Yes.
our constraint is.
Yes.
The
and
guild can only be made of humans.
And so, and this is the real constraint right there. Detachment from sadism and masochism, by extension, stupidity, involving solipsism and objectivism. And which constitutes the end of retardation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How many more can I throw in there that are just fucking?
Whew. Wow. Yeah, so that's kind of like one of our thesis of, I guess, this meeting here, is that the guild requires humans, the human archetype, and there are many things there which fuck it up, which bring it back to that crystallization of pre-life, amoeba life. You're like an amoeba. Your survival...
Worse.
Your
Worse.
survival...
The amoeba is not.
Worse than an amoeba. Okay.
The amoeba is not tethered
I didn't think we were
to,
going
to
go
remain
that far.
to remain the amoeba.
Because it all dies except for like some that don't have that DNA, the DNA
They
structure,
evolve.
and those survive.
We impose we impose
No,
restrictions
that
on what
never
the-
leaves us.
We
though.
impose the.
You
we-
can't be worse than that.
We impose artificial barriers to how the DNA structure could further evolve.
Oh, like
to
we
deal
actually
with the
we actually
situations
go backwards in our recuperation
by limiting
ability.
scarcity, for example.
We actually reverse that force of Darwinism.
Scarcity is
will.
a move towards it.
Interesting. So we're actually worse than amoebas in our management of the neurology, the inner and outer.
We create an environment where
The
only
manifold.
things fit for it are
The
things
great
that are
manifold.
not. We create an environment that the only things fit for it are things not fit for living.
Damn. They're not humans. At least we know that much. Not expressing the human archetype, when the human goes back to a zombie, it can only go into one type of machine. That machine is called the market machine. It cannot participate in the polymorphic machine. That requires a human archetype. Only the dead can shuffle into the market machine.
So yeah, death is the problem. No, it's not. So yeah, those are the problem, and the resolution of neurosis and psychosis through the obliteration of objectivism and solipsism.
Now you can walk into the market machine. That's different from shuffling. I was just gonna say, like I walk up to the market machine. I go, ugh. I have a sigh of disgust and all that.
Well, it's like walking up to a rock and
But
not
I
being
don't-
able to eat it.
I don't shuffle up to it. I don't like lurch and like.
But like it's the same analogy as like you don't walk up to a bunch of rocks and then start complaining to them because they're not edible. Why are you there if you're not for my benefit?
Yeah.
Like, fuck off.
Start complaining. Yep. So actually, we're at the last probably 15 minutes of this beautiful live stream dev meeting, which I think we've pretty much nailed down, like what we tried to with the whole self-reference getting the whole side channel thing up to date and
The
all that.
self being the illusion that is very, very persistent and crustified and calcified and crystallized, and the reason it's not actually any of those things. But
Pardon?
the mistake being made, if that is taken for what it is, it becomes an ego and a utilitarian element.
Well, and overall, this is what emerges out into the society layer when we think, what are we all building together? Well, because we're all like this is what we're building together. A machine that creates turds out of everyone and shits the whole world out onto itself. Something like that. It's not pretty. So in this chapter of the self, we have to at least deal with the constraints of what needs to become, what is needed of the person, the being, to become a part of the guild.
The self needs to be constrained to a mental concept that is not taken too seriously.
Uncertainty.
What is ultimately is required is to make self uncertain. Yes.
Right. And
which does not rub people the right way in any stretch of the imagination.
So in our neurology, we see a reflection of the ability of a swarm of amoebas in an environment to...
Not in neurology, that's in chemistry, come on.
I know.
You said neurology. This time it's chemistry.
I'm relating it all the way back down to that amoeba's ability to Darwinically survive of the best DNA, whatever, for that environment, for that spot, because that's the one that lives. We are taking that ability, and instead of having to die all the time, we are virtualizing the reality. And we have to allow our virtualizations to die when they no longer become coherent to reality. We need a Darwinism. We need to clean up our own thought processes, right? Of that which doesn't fit anymore.
And Darwinism is another trigger word, because oftentimes Darwinism was taken to be in the worst sense of like, if you are not fit for survival, we should kill you.
Right.
So
it's always been taken in a straightforward,
that's not the kind of
cold
Darwinism
way.
that we're referring to here.
Survival of the fittest.
And that's not the survival of the fittest, because that's the wrong fittest delineation.
And you're just kind of looking at the outcome too.
Colonial Darwinism was based on the wrong idea of survival of the fittest being the fittest being the person that can kill the other person.
So who survives literally? That's in the end. That's
right. Which pits it into a very unnecessary competition of death for absolutely
on a small scale, which that's not where it belongs.
So it amounts to extermination of actual peoples and genocide.
Right. So yeah, good times.
So Darwinism is probably the wrong word.
But I use it in that sense that you get like the amoeba colony. You know, some of them more suited by mutation to survive.
Amoebas don't form colonies.
Well, fine, but I mean like a bunch of replicants of the same thing in an environment. That's what I mean by a colony. Whatever, I don't give a shit if they care about each other or not.
No, it's a convoluted subject to begin with.
But some will survive, some will not, because the environment changes, and some are suited for that, and some aren't.
I think,
and that's what I mean. That concepts in the mind should be subject to that process. That's what brings humanity. That's the purpose of humanity.
You know what's an easier way to think about it? Forget amoebas. Think starting at singular cell, but not really staying there. And thinking about, okay, if you make the system slightly bigger, you need to inject a subsystem inside of it to reflect the additional complexity.
The neurology. I get you,
as
man.
soon as you,
Oh, man.
so you expand the system, but then you implant the system with more complexity to reflect the expansion, and on and on and on until you get so many layers of reflection inside the system that it's like a colony of a thing. So it works with ants, and it works
the
with
word
a single
colony,
person thinking, and it works with a society.
The word colony
plan.
evoked an emergent unit for you, like at a different, higher layer.
Yeah, but I was thinking about ants.
Yeah, sure.
Not
amoeba.
human,
I just
not
meant
human
like amoeba in a soup. They don't give a shit about each other. Fine. But that ability to adapt needs to be reflected analogically.
Not only that, but the other issue that we kind of touched on was when you have the secondary system doing reflection and a tertiary system doing re-reflection of the entire thing.
Mm-hmm. In other words, you're trying to build a complex adaptive systemic model of what's below you by building up upon things, and your own model gets kind of off teeter with reality.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that the tertiary, the fourth order, fifth order, whatever, says how many over, like say the neural system is controlling the body first, right? But then internalizes the meaning of those controls further and further into sequences of actions and full blown patterns. At some point, that system becomes so sophisticated that it has enough information within itself to reflect reality almost to a T. In comes the human, aka not that creature, but the creature that capitalizes upon that and lives solely off of the representations apart from where there's representation came from. Writing systems, externalization, and so on flow from that, and you have human civilization. So human animal, pre-human civilization without all the writing and all that externalization, and then that bolted on
You're
top.
describing a behavior that bolts on top of a plateau.
Because it has the capacity to do so without any repercussion of the not doing so, or for doing so.
Yep. Interesting complex adaptive systems to look into.
AKA delay and response. There's a delay and response. So if you take those steps and it doesn't kill you, you can keep going.
Yep. True story. Yep. So I think we're almost near the end of today's meeting. It's been glorious.
Let's end it here.
Have we got pretty much everything in there, I think, that we wanted to for the day?
Yeah, we did. Let's end it here.
Bam.
I'll check another one down.
And they're here. Well, technically we have, 5 minutes left. It could just be, you could stand up and pace, walk back and forth. Or we could end it here. But
I don't know if there's anything useful I can add. My head spins around self and all
I'm
that
glad
stuff.
that we nailed down the self pretty well. And the side channel, we talked about that. That's concrete. That's fundamental for this. And we also bounced back to about neurosis, psychosis. Beautiful in the previous section. Where to go from here? I'm glad that this time I was able to bring up deck protocol again and logbook protocol just as a bare minimum of media that you can use to bootstrap this kind of progression.
Yeah, it's important
protocol
that
development.
It's important that nobody looks at all of this and be like, "What the fuck are you stuck in the 19th century?"
Yeah, well, I mean, about agile economics is what we're getting into. That's what this is. This is about the economic skill.
Yeah, the idea of the logbook being on an incident book.
We're not saying this is the right way to do it, but we're just this right now. I'm trying this.
It's the responsible
I'm
way
trying
it
it.
is.
I'm gonna see how it works, and try to use this to do a guild. And that's why I tried to connect with Savvy Fox as well and the Obelisk about that. He said he's got shits going on there right now, right? We need pragmatic ways of actually gluing together people through shared media.
As long as it's not
It's
a
all
numbers
this
game.
talk is nothing unless there's some books and some cards
Unless
going
we
on
have statistics.
that are melting and gluing people together. You're looking at shared media.
We need statistics.
Well, that's probably on top of that's probably programmatic on top of that.
I'm going to tell you all about why that's a problem.
Well, no, it's all about flocking, anyways, and having the media to do it.
I'll end with this. Before times,
Okay.
we did not need to come to each other as separate human beings and establish an outwards dictionary of what terms mean.
I know.
The story I would tell you would be interpreted in the sense that of your experiences. The story that you tell me would be interpreted from the perspective of my experiences.
I know.
And
But the
the
ontological
need-
matrix exists right now, and we can use it very fast to just, bam, bootstrap the shit out of the guild, and everybody
Well, I
gets
am
it.
contrasting it with the before times.
In the before times. Now
There's a problem. Now we can't do that.
there's a problem
But
and an opportunity.
the difference for now is that we have to be fully aware of when we externalize an ontological matrix, it's for the purpose of reinterpreting back something that's far more personal. But we're now forced to do this very explicitly, simply so that we don't step on each other's toes.
Right.
Because so much of the language has been commodified and reinterpreted for us that we have to take 2 steps back instead of 1. Not
Right,
only do
right.
we need to build a common ontological matrix, we also have to destroy it after the fact to ensure that we don't walk away from it thinking that we came from the same place. Because we never
Right.
did, and that never happened. The only
This
thing
is
that happened was
technology. That's
we
pure
had
technology.
a contextual moment, and now we're forcing it to be a contextual moment explicitly, whereas it used to happen implicitly because we did not hold different expectations
Right.
before. We do
And
now.
this is part of this brain technology at this level, is that it must be destroyed once it's gone. Once the context has decayed, that's it.
Absolutely.
Move on.
And so that's why there's a bigger resistance to trying to stick to the dictionary.
Just thought I'd throw some artifacts. Where's our white one? It's gone. Yeah, well,
Phone
it's.
call.
Oh, here it comes. And with that, we will peace out.